Hello and welcome to the ChatGPT and Next JS course. In this course, we're going to be building a type of ChatGPT clone using OpenAI and Next JS. And we're going to be putting our own little twist on it by creating an application called ChatGPT. Now, ChatGPT will have user accounts, and we'll be implementing user accounts with Auth 0. So once our users have signed up into our app and logged into our app, they'll be presented with a very similar user interface compared to ChatGPT. They'll have a list of their previous chats on the left-hand side, and they'll be able to create a new chat. So let's click on through to an existing chat. We can see we've got our chat formatted in Markdown, so we get this nicely formatted response from OpenAI, but we also have our slight twist. So we can say, what is your name? And if you type that into ChatGPT, it will come back as something like, my name is ChatGPT. But if we hit send in our application, we stream the response back and we get informed that our app's name is ChatGPT. So while this looks like a very basic app, we do cover a lot in this course. So we're covering everything that we're going to need within Next.js. We'll be styling our app with Tailwind CSS. We'll be implementing Auth 0 for user accounts, and we'll be storing all our information using MongoDB. So with that said, I look forward to seeing you in the next lecture where we'll kick off this course. In this lecture, we're going to set up our initial Next.js project based on the starter repo that I've created for this course. Now, the reason I've created a starter repo for this course is because we don't have to waste time during the course to npm install a bunch of packages that we're going to need throughout the course. Also, it means we're going to be on exactly the same versions of packages while working through this course together. So with that said then, let's create our very bare bones project based on the starter repo that I've created for this course. So to do that, I've opened up a new Visual Studio Code window, and I've opened up the terminal by going to Terminal, New Terminal. Then I'm simply going to create a new project using npx create next app, followed by the name we want to give our app. So the name we want to give our app is something like ChatGPT course. Then what we want to do is specify a starter repo for this project. So we can do that by using the -e flag, followed by the URL of a particular GitHub repo. Now we want to reference the starter repo that I've created for this course. So we can go https github.com/tomphil/nextjs-chatgpt-starter. Then we want to do one last thing, which is we want to use npm instead of yarn in this course. So we can use the --use npm flag. So let's hit enter on this, and our new project should be created. So to navigate to our new project then, let's change directory into the new ChatGPT course directory, which was just created as part of the command we just run. So to do that, we can go cd chatty-pete-course. Then we want to open up it in Visual Studio Code. So to do that, we can do this via the terminal and the command line, and we can go && here, which will chain these two commands, followed by code dot. So what we're doing here is we're changing our directory into our new project, the ChatGPT course project. Then we're using the code dot command to open up this particular directory in a new Visual Studio Code window. So let's hit enter on this, and we should see a new Visual Studio Code window open up for us that contains our new ChatGPT course project. So first of all, before we go through anything to do with the project, I'm going to open up a new terminal, and I'm going to quickly run the project to make sure everything is running correctly and there's no errors. So let's go npm run dev. Now this should spool up a local server for us and make our project available at localhost 3000. So let's click on through to localhost 3000 in the browser, and there we go. We can see we have our project all running correctly, and we have welcome to the Next JS and ChatGPT starter. So let's quickly go through then. Before we write any code, I want to quickly just go through all the things I've included as part of the starter repo for this course. And again, I haven't actually included much to the starter repo. It just means though we don't have to write a bunch of boilerplate and we don't have to npm install a bunch of packages. So this is already set up for us. So first of all, let's take a look at the package.json. So we're going to be using Auth 0 throughout this course for authentication. and handling our users. So that's why we've included Auth 0 as a package, and specifically the Next.js-Auth 0 package. Then we're going to be using Font Awesome for a few different icons throughout our app. So that's why we've included the Font Awesome packages, these 3 Font Awesome packages here. And of course, we're going to be using MongoDB as our database. So we've also got MongoDB as a dependency. And of course, this is a Next project, so we have Next as a dependency. Then we have the OpenAI Edge Stream, which will allow us to stream back responses from the OpenAI API. So instead of having to wait for one full response, we'll get chunks back from the response and display that to the user exactly how ChatGPT works. It doesn't wait for the full response and then show it to the user. The response comes back in chunks and is displayed to the user as those chunks come in. Then we've got React and React DOM because Next.js uses React. Then we've got React Markdown. So what we're going to do is specify to the OpenAI API that all responses should be returned as Markdown where appropriate. So then our responses just look a little bit nicer when we're rendering them to the screen. So it'll have things like headings, and if the response contains things like code snippets, it just means that this all looks a little bit nicer rendered as Markdown. Then we've got Sharp, which is a package that, when included with a Next.js project, automatically optimizes any images that we have throughout our project. Now, of course, in this app, we don't actually have many images at all. In fact, I think the only image we're actually going to be displaying is the very small user icon when viewing chat messages. However, this package is used for image optimizations. Then we have UUID, which will just generate on the fly for us unique identifiers. So this is useful when rendering an array in React, where each element in the array doesn't actually have a unique ID. So this is where we're going to be using the UUID package. Then in our dev dependencies, we've got a couple of different Tailwind CSS dependencies, as well as Tailwind CSS, because we're going to be using Tailwind CSS to style our project. Then we've got Post CSS, which Tailwind CSS uses under the hood. Then we've got things like Prettier, which just automatically formats our code in a nice and consistent way. Then we have ESLint. So quickly before we move on to actually writing some code in the next lecture then, I want to quickly point out as well that I've included a jsconfig.json file where we've got a base URL in the compiler options set to just a period here. And this enables absolute imports for us within our Next.js project. Then we've got Prettier RC, where I've just added a tab width of 2. So this is a tab width here. So we've got 1, 2 spaces instead of sometimes you'll see 4 spaces. I prefer a tab width of 2. So that's why I've got my Prettier RC set to tab width 2 here. Then we've got our tailwind.config.js, which just points Tailwind to the correct directories and files that it should scan to include as part of the output CSS for our project. Then in our styles and globals.css, we're including all the boilerplate Tailwind imports into globals.css. Then finally, in our lib directory, we have mongodb.js, which just includes all the boilerplate code to connect to our MongoDB database. And it's important to note that this isn't some configuration that I've magically come up with. This boilerplate is actually directly from the MongoDB docs. So that's why I've included it as part of the starter repo for this course. So that pretty much concludes all of the extra files and setup that I've included on top of the bare bones project that Create Next app creates for us. So you can see that I haven't actually included that much as part of the starter repo for this course, but it just saves a bunch of time and gets us up and running as quickly as possible. So in the next lecture then, we're going to take a look at this pages directory, because the pages directory is a special directory within Next.js, and we're going to create the relevant pages that we're going to need for our app in this course. Hey guys, before we move on to the next video, I want to quickly point out that throughout this course, you'll probably see a review prompt similar to what you're seeing now, where Udemy will ask you to leave a rating and/or review of the course so far. Now, this is optional. However, I'd really appreciate it if you did leave a rating and/or a review when these prompts do show up, because it lets other students know whether this course is for them or not. Additionally, it would mean the world to me if you could leave a rating and/or review. So thank you in advance if you do leave a rating and a review of the course, and I will see you in the next video where we'll continue with the course. In this lecture, we're going to take a look at the pages directory within Next.js, and we're going to set up our chat page and our chat route so it's accessible within our app. So first of all, let's run npm run dev and head on over to localhost 3000 in the browser. And just like before, we can see we have a message here saying welcome to the Next JS and ChatGPT starter. So we can see this is being rendered from this index.js page. Now, Next.js has a file system based routing API. So any files that we add to the pages directory will automatically become routes for us available in our app. So let's first of all copy everything we've got for the index.js page. And in the pages directory, let's create a new file called chat.js. And then let's paste everything from the index.js page into the chat.js page. Now let's update our message here to say welcome to the chat page. And let's save this and take a look in the browser. And let's head on over to localhost 3000/chat. And there we can see we're now rendering a new page. Welcome to the chat page. So just to demonstrate how this is all working then, if we navigated to /chats, for example, then we get displayed a 404 page because we don't have a chats.js file name in the pages directory. So because we've added a chat.js file name in the pages directory, Next.js has automatically gone ahead and set up the route for us available at localhost 3000/chat. However, if we refer to the completed project, this presents us with a new chat page. But we want to render exactly the same component if we're on the new chat page or if we're on a individual chat page, so a chat page that already exists. So we want to render exactly the same component if we access /chat or if we access /chat/ followed by the chat ID. So to do this in Next.js, we want to create something called a dynamic route. So before we actually implement this dynamic route, let's head on over to our localhost 3000 and let's just make sure that this actually isn't working if we try to access /chat/ followed by any random string. So that's assuming it's a chat ID. So let's put any random string in here, and there we go. We get presented with the 404 page. So what we want to do here is set up a dynamic route in our app. And we can do that by creating a new folder in the pages directory. So we want to create a new folder in here called chat. Then we want to just delete what we've got for chat.js because we no longer need this. And in this chat directory then, let's create a new file in here, and this is going to be our dynamic route. So to create a dynamic route in Next.js, we need to define it using a set of square brackets. So within this set of square brackets then, we want to add any random variable name in here that we can access later on to access the particular chat ID. So it makes sense we call this either ID or chat ID. I'm going to keep mine as chat ID, but again, this could be anything you want. You could put Jim in here, for example, but I'm going to name it something relevant and it's going to represent the chat ID. So I'm going to add chat ID in here within the square brackets, followed by .js. Now, what we want to do then is let's do exactly the same thing. Let's copy our index.js contents and paste it in for the chat ID.js. Now let's update our message to welcome to the chat ID page, and let's save this and take a look in the browser now. And it should have already refreshed in the background, and there we go. We can see we're now accessing welcome to the chat ID page, and the route is working at chat/ followed by presumably a random string, which is a chat ID. However, like I mentioned before, we want exactly the same component to render if we're on a particular chat ID page or the new chat page. So the new chat page will be accessible at /chat. So if we hit enter on this now, we can see we're being rendered a 404 page. Now this is because when we're creating dynamic routes, for example, we've got chat and a dynamic route here with chat ID. The only routes that are going to work here is chat/ and then any random string. So for example, if we had chat/ followed by any random string followed by another random string, so we've got chat/ random string / random string, this also isn't going to work for our dynamic route that we've set up here. So if, for example, we wanted to match this particular route structure here and any number of / and then random strings, then we could use the catch-all dynamic route. So we just need to rename our file here to ... chat ID. And this now is a catch-all. So now we can access chat/ and then any number of random strings and any number of slashes, and this route will be completely valid to access within our app. However, even with the catch-all dynamic route, this route still won't match just chat. So if we confirm this then back in our project, if we give just /chat a refresh, then we're still getting that 404 page. But if we try to access chat / and then random string and then /random string/random string, we can see that this particular route structure now works. But we want to be able to have /chat to work and /chat followed by the random string. So back in our code, what we can do is implement something called an optional catch-all dynamic route. So to implement the optional catch-all dynamic route, we can just rename our file here to double square brackets .chatid.js. So if we hit enter on this now, and we head on over to the browser, let's try and access /chat now, and there we go. Our page is rendering as expected, and we can also access chat / followed by the random string. And of course, that random string here, this particular portion of it, will represent the chat ID. So in the next lecture then, we're going to make a start on setting up Auth0 for authentication and user accounts within our app. In this lecture, we're going to set up our Auth0 account, ready to accept our new users to be able to log in and register to our app. So first of all, we need to head on over to auth0.com, and I already have an account, so I'm going to log into my account. However, you may need to sign up if you don't currently have an account. Then from the dashboard, we can either hit create application here, or we can also access the create application from applications and hit the applications menu item here. Then we want to hit create application. Now I'm going to name my application something like Chatty Pete Course, and I'm going to select a regular web application. Then what we want to do is hit create, and we'll get presented with a bunch of different helper sections here to get started with a particular framework that we're using. So we're using Next JS. We can click on through to this particular helper page. However, this isn't really necessary because it's just outlining exactly what I'm about to tell you now anyway. So let's head on over then, right at the top here of our new Chatty Pete course application. We want to head on over to the settings tab, and we want to copy a bunch of the information related to our application in Auth0, and we need to add these as environment variables in our app. So if we head on over to our code, what we want to do is create a new environment variable file in the root directory of our project. So let's create a new file here called .env.local, and Next.js is automatically going to pick up that we've got this .env.local file, and it's automatically going to load all of these environment variables for us to be able to access them throughout our app. And there's a bunch of Auth0 specific environment variables we need to fill out here. So it's a lot easier if we head on back to the Auth0 dashboard, and in the quick start here, because we selected Next.js, if we scroll all the way down, we should get a snippet here of all the environment variables that we need to add in our .env.local file. So let's just copy all of these environment variables here and paste them in for our .env.local file in our project. Now, the first one we can fill out easily is the Auth0 secret. So Auth0 is suggesting that we run this particular command in the terminal to generate a 32-byte value, which we can use as our Auth0 secret. So let's open up a new terminal window here, and let's run the OpenSSL rand-hex 32 command, and this will return us a 32-byte value here. So let's copy this value and paste it in for our Auth0 secret. And it's important to note that we don't need the surrounding single or double quotation marks here, so we can just paste it without those quotation marks. Then our Auth0 base URL is localhost 3000, but again, we need to remove these quotation marks. Then the Auth0 issuer base URL, again, let's remove these quotation marks, but let's also confirm that this is the correct base URL. So if we head on back to the Auth0 dashboard, if we scroll up to our settings, it's this particular domain name here. So if we take note of this domain name here and back in our .env.local, we can see that this domain name is correct. So then the Auth0 client ID, again, let's make sure that's correct. So it starts with 1, Z, and ends in J3. And that looks like that's correct there. But again, we don't need these quotation marks. And then finally, we have the Auth0 client secret. So back in our Auth0 dashboard, if we click to reveal the client secret, we can see that this in fact is the correct client secret. But once again, we need to remove those single quotation marks. So before we continue, we need to finish up our setup in our Auth0 dashboard. So if we head on back to our Auth0 dashboard then, and still in the settings tab here, we want to scroll down and make sure that we fill in these application URIs here. And specifically, we need to fill in the allowed callback URLs and the allowed logout URLs. So first of all, let's add the allowed logout URLs, and we want to add HTTP localhost 3000, and we want to do exactly the same for the allowed callback URLs. However, we want to add /API/auth/callback. Now we're going to set this up in the next lecture within our Next JS project. However, for now, let's scroll down and make sure that we save our changes. And this concludes our setup for Auth0 in the Auth0 dashboard. So in the next lecture then, we're going to implement this and make sure everything is working correctly in our Next JS project. So we'll take a look at implementing Auth0 in our Next JS project in the next lecture. In this lecture, we're going to set up Auth0 within our Next JS project. So to do this, we can head on over to our pages directory, and we need to add some configuration in our API directory. Now, just like what I mentioned with the pages directory being a special directory within Next.js, additionally, the API directory is also a special directory within Next.js, in that we can create our own API endpoints. So quickly to demonstrate this, I'm going to run npm run dev, and we can see we have an API and hello.js here, which all it's doing is sending some JSON back to the client with a name called John Doe. So let's try and access this from the browser then. If we go to /API/hello, we can see we return some JSON with the name John Doe. So this is how we're going to set up Auth0, because Auth0 needs to set up some API endpoints so we can log in, sign up, and log out. So all of that is done server-side and via API endpoints. And fortunately, we don't have to do much work at all to get all this set up. We don't have to do anything manually because Auth0 has conveniently created a package for us that we can use, which will set everything up for us. So if we head on back to our code, within the API directory, let's create a new folder in here called auth. Then within the auth directory, we want to create a new file in here, and we're going to use the catch-all dynamic route in here. So we're going to open up a set of square brackets and type ... auth0.js. Then all we need to do is import handle auth from @auth0/nextjs-auth0. And remember, this is a package that I've included as part of the starter repo for this course. And you need to make sure that the handle auth is actually a lowercase h rather than a uppercase h, which I accidentally had imported. So it needs to be a lowercase handle auth. Then all we need to do is export default handle auth, and handle auth is a function. And this is all we need to do to set up all of our API endpoints for authentication. So what we can do then is in our pages and index.js, let's test this out. Underneath our h1, let's create a div here and a link. And we need to import this link component from next/link at the top here. And we're simply going to add login for our link label. And the href for this link is going to be /API/auth/login. Now, the reason we're using the built-in link component from Next.js rather than just a simple anchor tag is because the Next.js link component has a bunch of built-in optimizations that the vanilla anchor tag simply doesn't have. So with that said then, let's navigate then back to our localhost 3000 in the browser. Now we can see we have this login link. Let's click on the login link, and there we go. We're navigated to the Auth0 flow now to either log in or sign up to our app. So I'm going to hit accept here, and that's already automatically logged me in. However, at the moment, we have no idea if we're logged in or not because we're still just rendering the localhost 3000 bare bones page, and we're still just rendering the login button. So if I try and click login again, nothing is actually going to change because we're already logged in. However, ideally, we need some sort of state to know if we're logged in or not. So in the next lecture then, we're going to take a look at conditionally rendering this login button. And if we're logged in, we'll render a logout button. If we're logged out, then we'll render the login button. So we'll take a look at that in the next lecture. In this lecture, we're going to conditionally render our login button because if we're already logged in, we want to then render a logout button rather than a login button. But first of all, continuing from the last lecture, let's quickly check to see our users in our app and actually check to see where we can find our users that signed up to our app through the Auth0 dashboard. So in our Auth0 dashboard then, we can go to User Management and Users, and I've got a bunch of test users that I've already created while creating this course. However, you should just see one user, and that should be the user that you've just created in the last lecture. So this is how we can view our users through the Auth0 dashboard. With that said then, my user that I've logged in as is info@tomphil.co.uk. And Auth0 has grabbed my profile picture from Gravatar and assigned that same profile picture within the Auth0 dashboard. However, if you've never signed up to Gravatar before and you don't have a Gravatar profile, then Auth0 will generate for you an avatar based on your email address. So the first two letters of the email address. With that said then, let's go back to our code and actually create some logic to conditionally render our login and logout buttons. So in our pages and index.js, we can use the useUser hook from Auth0 to check to see if a user session already exists. So here we can go const and we can destructure from useUser, and we need to import useUser at the top here from @auth0/nextjs-auth0/client. And we can destructure then the user if there's a particular error or not, and if the user is currently loading. So let's destructure is loading, error, and user. Then what we want to do is, if the current user session is loading, then what we want to do is check to see if is loading, and if is loading is true, then we just want to return a div that says loading. Additionally, if there's an error, we want to check to see if error, and then we want to return a div that just renders the error.message. Then if we're not loading and we don't have an error, then we can render our app, and then it's at this point that we want to check our user. So instead of just rendering this login button, let's check to see if user exists. If user exists, what we want to do is render a logout button because it means the user is currently logged in. However, if user doesn't exist or if there's no value set to user, then it means there's no currently logged in user, so we can render the login button. So let's update our logout button here then and our logout logic. So we want to go logout as the logout button label, and we want to navigate to API/auth/logout. Now again, it's important to note that the API/auth/login and the API/auth/logout has all been set up for us with Auth0 in the logic that we created in the Auth0 root in the API directory and the auth directory, and all set up for us with the handle auth function. So if we head on back to index.js then, and we save this now, and we take a look in the browser at localhost 3000, it seems we're getting an error here, and that is because to be able to use the useUser hook, we need to wrap our entire app in the user provider. So let's go ahead and do that then. Back in our code, for our _app.js, we need to wrap our entire app in the user provider. Now, this _app.js is a special file in Next.js in that it wraps every single page component that gets rendered in our app. So we can kind of see our logic here. Every time we navigate to a particular page within Next.js, Next.js knows that we have an _app.js file, and it will render our page within anything that we render within the app component. So we're already rendering here the head component from next/head, and we're just setting a global favicon, which we can find at the moment in public and favicon.png. Then we're just rendering any page component based on the route that we navigate to in the browser. So it's in here then that we actually want to wrap our entire app in the user provider. So instead of this fragment here, let's render the user provider, and we need to import that at the top here from @auth0/nextjs-auth0/client. And then instead of the closing fragment here, we need a closing user provider. So if we save this now and take a look in the browser, let's give it a refresh, and there we go. We're rendering now our logout button. So if we hit logout, we can now see we've successfully logged out and we're rendering the login button. So let's go ahead and hit the login button and log into our app. And there we go, we've successfully logged in again, and now we're displayed with the logout button because we are currently logged in. So in the next lecture then, we're going to continue building out our homepage and make it look more like our completed project. So we're going to start styling our app in the next lecture using Tailwind CSS. In this lecture, we're going to start styling our homepage using Tailwind CSS. So if we refer to the completed project, we can see we've got a very basic homepage here with a font awesome icon of a little robot head, and we've got some title and subtitle text, as well as a login and a sign up button. Additionally, we can see we're rendering a title here called Chatty Pete login or sign up. So let's make a start with that. Back in our code, let's update our title here. Instead of Next JS ChatGPT starter, let's update this to say Chatty Pete login or sign up. So let's save this now and take a look in the browser at localhost 3000. And there we go. We can see our title now matches the completed project. And quickly before we start the styling then, I want to quickly point out that anytime we render the head component within Next.js, we can add any relevant head tags within the head component, and Next.js will apply those tags for us in the actual head tag of our web page. So previously we'd be using something like React Helmet for this. However, Next.js makes it super easy to do this with the head component. So with that said then, let's move on to actually styling our app. First of all, I want to remove this boilerplate h1 tag, and I'm going to remove this top level div and just render a React fragment. Then, as part of our main div tag here, let's add a bunch of Tailwind CSS class names. Now, the important thing to note with Tailwind CSS is it comes out of the box with a bunch of utility classes, and it makes it super easy for us to style our app. So, for example, I want our main div here to span the full width and the full height of the page. So to do that, we can add a min-h-screen class from Tailwind CSS, which will give a minimum height of 100 viewport height. So essentially the full height of the screen. Then we can add a w-full, which will give us a width of 100%. Next, I want to add that dark blue background color. So I'm going to go bg-gray-800 here, which will give that dark gray/blue background color. Then I want to add a text color of white, which will give a color of white. Then let's also align our text to the center. So to do that, we can also add a text center, which will give a text align of center. So before we go any further then, let's save this and take a look in the browser at localhost 3000. And there we go, we've got that nice dark blue or dark gray background color, and we've got our white text all centrally aligned to the screen. Next, let's add a couple more styles then and a couple more class names. I'm going to wrap both our login and logout buttons in a div here. So let's wrap both of these links in a div. Then let's make the wrapper div here display flex. And to do that, we can just use the flex class, which will give a display of flex. Then we can centrally align this div to the screen by using justify center, which will add a justify content center, and an items center, which will add a align item center. So this will centrally align this particular div vertically and horizontally. So if we save this and take a look in the browser now, there we go. We can see our logout button is now centrally aligned vertically and horizontally. From here then, I'm just going to log out because I want to work on the login and the sign up buttons. So back in our code, I'm going to keep the logout button and the logout link as it is because we're actually going to remove this in a later lecture. But for now, I want to start styling the login button. So as well as the login button here, let's also let's add a React fragment. And as well as the login button, let's also render a sign up button. So let's render a sign up link there. And I've got sing up there, so it should be sign up. Then let's add some class names to the login link and make it look more like a button. So if we quickly refer to the completed project, we've got some nice border radius here for our buttons. We've got a little hover over effect where the background changes, and we've got a fairly light green color and then a fairly dark green color when we hover over, as well as a text of white. So let's implement all those classes then. Back in our code, for our class names, first of all, let's add a rounded MD, which will give a border radius of 6 pixels. Then let's add a BG Emerald 500, which will give that fairly light green background color. Let's add a px, so this is the x-axis, which means the left and right, of 4. So we'll have a padding on the left and right of 16 pixels, and a padding on the y-axis, so the top and bottom of 2, which will give us a padding on the top and bottom of 8 pixels. From here then, let's also add a text white for our white text color, and we want to add that hover over color, so we want to change the color to a darker background color of emerald whenever we hover over this particular link. And to do that in Tailwind CSS is super easy. We can just add a hover class followed by a colon followed by any valid Tailwind CSS class. So here then, we can target the hover state and assign the BG Emerald 600 shade. So this will give a slightly darker green color whenever we hover over this particular link. So if we save this now then and take a look in the browser at localhost 3000, and there we go, we can see we've got our nice login button, and all we need to do then is apply exactly the same classes to our sign up button. So back in our code again, let's just copy our class name prop that we've got for this link component and do exactly the same. Let's just paste it in for the sign up button. So let's save this and take a look in the browser now. And there we go, we've got our login and our sign up button. Now we do have a couple more styles and things to implement on the homepage, such as the robot header icon and our heading and subheading. However, I'm going to save that for a future lecture because in the next lecture, I want to actually implement the sign up functionality, because at the moment we've only implemented the login functionality. So if we click on the login button here, we can see we're directed to a login page. But ideally, we also want a sign up button that will automatically navigate to the sign up page. So if we hit back in the browser here and quickly back in our code, instead of navigating to API/auth/login for the sign up button, we want to navigate to API/auth/signup. So if we save this now and take a look in the browser, if we hit on the sign up button, we can see that this API route doesn't actually exist. So this isn't automatically created for us within the handle auth in our pages, API, auth, and auth0 page. So handle auth from auth0 doesn't set up a sign up endpoint for us. It only sets up a login endpoint for us. So in the next lecture, this is actually really easy to do and only takes 2 seconds to do, but I want to separate this out into a new lecture so it's a lot easier for you to find this information. So in the next lecture, we're going to implement a sign-up API endpoint. In this lecture, we're going to implement our sign-up API endpoint with auth0. So at the moment, if we navigate to localhost 3000 and we hit sign up, we get a page cannot be found because we don't have a sign-up API endpoint set up yet. But to do this is super simple. All we need to do is head on back to our code, and for our API, auth, and auth0.js, within the handle auth function, we can set up some custom API routes here. So all we need to do is pass an object to the handle auth function, and every key that we pass to the handle auth function will generate a new API route for us within our API/auth route. So we want to specify a sign-up route here. So to specify a sign-up route, we just need to add a sign-up key to the handle auth object. Then we need to import handle login from @auth0/nextjs-auth0, and we want to call the handle login function, and we want to pass an object to the handle login function, and all we need to pass is the authorization parameters passed as authorization params, and a screen hint set to sign up. And that is literally all we need to do to get a sign up API route set up within auth0. So if we head on back to the browser now then at localhost 3000 and we hit sign up, we can now see that our sign up form is working and we're actually navigated by default to the sign up form. So if we hit back in the browser here and we hit the login button, we can see that we're navigated to the login form. Again, if we hit back in the browser and hit the sign up button, we can see that we're presented with the sign up form. So I've already got an account. So again, I'm going to log into the app and then hit continue. So now that I'm logged into the app, ideally what we want to do is instead of navigating back to localhost 3000, i.e. instead of navigating back to our homepage, the expected functionality usually is to navigate to our dashboard. And in this case, whenever we log in, we want to automatically navigate the user to the /chat page, where they can create a new chat or navigate to an existing chat in their sidebar. So in the next lecture, we'll take a look at how we can redirect a logged in user so they're never going to the home page if they're logged in, but they're going to be redirected to the chat page. So we'll take a look at that in the next lecture. In this lecture, we're going to automatically redirect a logged in user to the /chat page. So if a user is already logged in, they'll never be able to access the home page unless they are logged out. So first of all, make sure you're actually logged in to our app. Then we can head on back to the code, and within pages and index.js, we want to add some logic in here to redirect the user if they're already logged in. So to do that, ideally, we want to perform this server-side. And Next.js comes out of the box with a function that will run when a page is requested, and this function will run server-side before then serving up the page to the user. And this function is called getServerSideProps. And generally, I prefer to export this function right at the bottom of any page components. So right at the bottom here, we can go export const getServerSideProps. And you need to make sure it's spelled exactly this way because Next.js is expecting the function to be named like so. It can't be getServerSideProps Gym, for example, because then it's not going to work. Because Next.js is expecting that a getServerSideProps function could exist as part of a page component. So we want to set this equal to an asynchronous function. And within this asynchronous function, we want to get the current user session. We want to check to see if there is a current user session. And if there is, we just simply want to redirect to the /chat page. So to do this, we can go const session and set this equal to await get session. And we need to import get session right at the top here from @auth0/nextjs-auth0. Then we want to pass in a request and a response object. And we can grab that off of the context argument that Next.js passes to the getServerSideProps function. So we have a context object that Next.js will pass to us within the getServerSideProps function, and it's on this context object that we can get the request and the response objects. So we simply need to pass to the getSession function ctx.request or ctx.req and ctx.res, which stands for response. Then we just simply want to check to see if a session is set. So if we have a session available, i.e. if the user is logged into our app, then we simply want to redirect to the /chat page. And to do that within the getServerSideProps, all we need to do is return an object with a redirect property. And on the redirect object, we need to set a destination, and we simply want to redirect to /chat. However, if there is no session, i.e. if there is no user logged in, then we simply want to return an object with a props property set equal to an empty object. So if we save this now then, and take a look in the browser, if we give localhost 3000 a refresh, we should be able to see we're automatically redirected to the /chat page if we're logged in. So let's try that again. If I try and access localhost 3000, it's not actually loading because it's automatically redirecting me to the /chat page because I'm already logged in. So from here to log out, we don't actually have a logout button, but we can manually log out by going to API/auth/logout, and then we get redirected to localhost 3000, i.e. our homepage. So again, if we go through the login flow, let's log into our app, let's hit continue, and we should now be redirected after logging in. We're automatically redirected to the /chat page. So in the next lecture then, we're going to start building out this chat page. And if we refer to the completed project, we're going to make a start on actually moving our logout button to a side panel here. So we're going to create the side panel in the next lecture, as well as creating a very simple form to start with to be able to query the OpenAI API and start streaming responses back. So we're going to make a start on all of this in the next lecture by creating our side panel and our simple form. In this lecture, we're going to make a start on building out our chat page and our chat layout. So if we quickly refer to the completed project, we can see we have 3 main sections to our chat page. So we have our chat window, which will display any messages, or if there are no messages, then we'll just prompt the user to ask me a question with our cool little robot head logo. So this chat window is one section. Then we have the sidebar or the side panel, which is another section. And we have this footer down here with our simple text area and button form. So this is the third section. So in this lecture, we're going to build out the framework for this and build out the foundation and the scaffold for these 3 sections. So back in our code then, for our pages, chat and chat ID page, let's first of all update our title here, and let's just update the title to say new chat. Then let's remove this boilerplate h1 that we've got, and let's remove this div and just render a React fragment. Then what we want to do is implement some sort of grid layout for our 3 different sections. So we could do this a number of different ways. However, I'm going to implement it as a 2-column grid to start with. So if we quickly refer to the completed project, we'll have a 2-column grid here. So our sidebar will be 1 column, and our chat window and our footer will be part of the 2nd column. So back in our code then, let's create that type of layout. Let's create a new div here. And on this div, we're going to create a grid layout using a bunch of Tailwind CSS classes. So first of all, we want to display grid. So we'll use the grid Tailwind CSS class to display grid. We want a fixed height of screen. So we can use the hScreen Tailwind CSS class, which will give a height of 100 viewport height. Then we want to specify our grid columns. Now, the first grid column, the sidebar, will be a fixed width. So we're going to have a fixed width of something like 260 pixels. Then the 2nd column will just span the remaining width of the screen. So back in our code then, let's code this up. We can use the grid-cols Tailwind CSS class here. However, we want to be very specific in our column widths here because we want to provide a specific value of 260 pixels. So to do this in Tailwind CSS is super easy. Whenever we want to specify a specific value and not conform to the built-in classes that come with Tailwind CSS, then we can just open up a set of square brackets followed by the value we want to apply. So in this case, we want a first column width of 260 pixels. Then we want the 2nd column width to be 1fr, which will fill the remaining width of the screen. However, we can't add a space in a class name and put 1fr as our 2nd column value, because this would mean then that this particular portion of the class name would be a single individual class name, and then this particular portion of the class name would be another single individual class name. So to cater for spaces in Tailwind CSS, we can simply use the underscore character. So this pretty much concludes the layout that we're going to need for our chat page, which means now then we need to add both of these new columns. So let's add 2 new divs here. The first one will be the sidebar, and the 2nd one will be the chat window. So if we save this now and take a look in the browser, at localhost 3000 for our /chat page, we can see we've got 2 columns now. The sidebar spans 260 pixels and the chat window fills the remaining width of the screen. So just to demonstrate this then, that the chat window does actually in fact span the full width of the screen, let's go back to our code and add a background color to the chat window. So on the chat window div, let's add a class name of bggray700. And let's save this now and take a look in the browser. And there we go. We can see our chat window is spanning the full width or the remaining width of the screen relative to our 260 pixel width sidebar column. So to finish this lecture up then, let's implement our 3rd section, which is our footer. So we want to implement this within the chat window. Back in our code then, for the chat window div, let's make this display flex. So we can use the flex Tailwind CSS class to display flex. And we want to display flex col. So any divs that we render within the flex col will stack on each other vertically rather than the default of displaying flex, which will display horizontally. Because if we refer to the completed project, we want our chat window and our footer to stack vertically. We don't want them side by side. We want them to stack vertically. So that's why we're using the flex col, which will give a flex direction of column. Then let's create 2 new divs then. So the first div within our chat window pane here will be our actual chat window. Then the 2nd div will be our footer. So before we take a look in the browser, let's update our footer here. And actually, instead of a div, it would make more sense that we have a footer tag. So let's add a couple of class names to this footer tag then. Let's add a slightly different background color. So let's add a BG gray of 800. And let's add a P10, so a padding all round of 40 pixels. Then what we want to do is, because we're displaying flex, we just want to make sure that while the footer will have a dynamic height based on the contents within the footer, we want to make sure that the chat window fills any remaining space. So to do this, we can add a class name of flex1 to our chat window. So if we save this now and take a look in the browser, at localhost 3000, There we go. We can see now our chat window fills any remaining space vertically compared to our footer. So our footer does have a dynamic height depending on the content we have in the footer, but then the chat window will fill all the remaining space of the height of the window. So now that we've got our structure and our scaffolding done for our chat page, in the next lecture, we're going to concentrate on our sidebar before then moving on to implementing our form and posting data and receiving data back from the OpenAI API. In this lecture, we're going to update our sidebar here by creating a new chat sidebar component, and we're going to render our logout button so we can easily log out of our app from within the sidebar. So back in our code then, let's first of all create a new directory in the root directory of our project, and we want to call this directory components. Then let's create a new component in here for our chat sidebar. So let's create a new folder in the components directory called chat sidebar. And within this chat sidebar folder, let's create an index.js, and we want to create another new file called chat sidebar.js. Then from the chat sidebar, let's just export const chat sidebar and set this equal to a bare bones React component for now. And let's just add chat sidebar hard-coded for now, just so we know that the chat sidebar will be rendering correctly. Then in index.js, let's export chat sidebar from /chat sidebar. Then in our pages, chat and chat ID page, let's render, instead of this div, let's render the chat sidebar. So let's render chat sidebar. And remember, you need to import chat sidebar at the top here from components/chat sidebar. So if we save this now then and take a look in the browser, there we go. We're successfully rendering the chat sidebar component. Now what we want to do is simply render our logout button within the chat sidebar. So if we go to our components and chat sidebar.js, within this div, we're not going to do too much styling in here, but let's just render a next link component with the text logout or with the label logout, and the href will be /API/auth/logout. And while we're here, let's add a background color to the chat sidebar and make sure that our text color is white so it's a little bit easier to read. So for the chat sidebar then, I'm going to add a BG gray of 900. So you can see throughout this app, we've got a bunch of different shades of this BG gray. And let's add a text white. So let's save this now and take a look in the browser. And there we go. We can see we've got our very simple logout button or our logout link. Let's click on our logout link just to make sure everything is working. And there we go. We can then log back into our application and we get navigated to the /chat page. So this is coming along really nicely now. And I think a really good idea from here then is to actually make a start on the OpenAI API calls. But before we do that, we need to make sure we have some sort of form where we can capture user input and a button to send that user input to the OpenAI API. So in the next lecture, we'll take a look at implementing our footer. In this lecture, we're going to implement our simple form in our footer to be able to capture user input to then send that user input to the OpenAI API. So back in our code then, within our pages, chat and chat ID page, first of all, let's do a quick refactor here because when we copied the index.js file contents, we still had the function name as home. So let's update this to something like the chat page. Then what we want to do is implement our footer. So we want to add a simple form to this footer with a text area and a button. So let's start this off then with a form tag, and let's render both the button and the text area within a field set tag. Now, I really like wrapping all of my form fields in a field set tag because anytime we set a disabled attribute on a field set tag, then any form fields that are rendered within the field set will automatically become disabled. So it saves us having to individually set a disabled attribute on every single one of our form fields when, for example, we're loading or we're submitting to an API, for example. So within this field set then, let's add our text area element. Then underneath the text area, let's add a button. And the label for this button, we're going to set as send. Then we just want to set the type equal to submit. So whenever we hit the submit button then, our form will submit, which means we need to add a submit handler to our form tag. But first of all, let's take a look in the browser just to see what we've got. So back in the browser then, our localhost 3000. We can see we've got our button here with pretty much no styling, and we've got our text area where we can actually increase the size of this text area. So let's update our styles first then to better reflect the completed project. So if we take a look at the completed project, we have a nice looking text area here and a nice looking button. So let's go ahead and implement those styles then. Back in our code, first of all, for our field set, let's add a class name here of flex. So our text area and button are definitely going to be rendered side by side. Then let's add a gap of 2, which will give an 8 pixel spacing between our text area and our button. Next then, let's move on to the styling of the text area. Let's add some class names, and we want to add a bunch of class names here to make it look more like the completed project. So let's add a W full, which will give a width of 100%. Let's add a resize none, which means then if we quickly take a look in localhost 3000, we can't use this little drag feature here in the text area. So we're going to have a fixed height for the text area, and the user can't dynamically increase or decrease the height. So that's what a resize of none will do. Then let's add a little bit of border radius using the rounded MD class, which will give a border radius all round of 6 pixels. Then let's add a BG gray 700, which will contrast slightly with our footer background color of BG gray 800. Then let's add a P2, which will give a padding all round of 8 pixels. Then let's add a text white, so it's easier to read our text within the text area on the BG Gray 700. So let's save this now then and take a look in the browser just to see what we've got so far. And there we go, this is coming along really nicely. Ideally though, we want to match the styles we've got in the completed project. So when we focus in on our text area, at the moment, we've got this blue outline here. However, it would be nice if we had a nice green outline whenever we focus in on the text area, and also make the background color slightly lighter so it's more obvious to the user that they've actually focused in on this text area. So back in our code then, let's add a bunch of styles that target the focused state. So to do that in Tailwind CSS is exactly the same as when we targeted the hover state previously for our login and sign up buttons. However, now we just want to target the focus state. So we can add a focus : class here, followed by any valid Tailwind CSS class. So on focus then, let's add a border emerald 500. Then on focus again, we want to also add a BG gray 600, so it will give that lighter background color compared to our default BG Gray 700. Then we want to add another focus style here, and we want to add the outline class, which will add an outline style of solid, because then we want to add an outline color of emerald 500. So then again, we can go focus, outline, emerald 500. So this will give an outline color of that nice emerald 500 shade. So if we save this now and take a look in the browser, and there we go, it's already refreshed in the background. So anytime we click on through or focus in to the text area, we can see our styles are now matching the completed project. So there's two last things we need to do now then, and that is, let's add a small placeholder to the text area. Just like the completed project, it says send a message. So we'll add a placeholder of send a message, and we'll implement our send button styles. So back in our code then, for our text area, let's add a placeholder here of send a message ... Then let's start implementing our send button styles. So let's add a class name to our button. And because we've already implemented styles for a button, which is the login and the sign up styles, we may as well copy all of the styles associated with those buttons and paste them for our send button. So back in our home page then, if we scroll up to our sign up or our login buttons, let's copy all the styles we've got and paste them in for our send button. So if we hit save on this now and take a look in the browser, and there we go, we can see now our styles have been applied to our send button. However, there's one small refactor I want to do before we finish up this lecture, and that is, ideally, we don't want to be copying and pasting all these styles anytime we need to use a button. So ideally, we want all of these styles to be associated with a single class name, for example, BTN, and then we can apply just that single BTN class name to any element where we want to make it styled like a button. So this is really easy to do, again, in Tailwind CSS. All we need to do is make sure you've still got your button styles, all the associated class names for a button copied to your clipboard. Then in our styles and globals.css, we can create something called a Tailwind CSS component. So to do that, we can use the layer directive from Tailwind CSS, and we can see we have 3 layers available to us from Tailwind. So the first layer is the base layer, where we add any styles to particular tags, for example, HTML, body, H1 through to H6, etc., etc. So this is when we want to target tag-specific styles. We use the base layer. Then we have the components layer, which is things like if we want to combine a bunch of class names to create just one class name. For example, what we're going to do now is create a BTN or a button class name. Then this is essentially a component. Then we have the utilities layer, which generally is atomic and will apply just one or two styles to a particular class name. For example, all the styles that come out of the box with Tailwind CSS are utility styles, because generally they'll only apply one or two styles associated with that class name. And one important thing to note is there's a type of hierarchy here. So utility classes can override component classes, and both utility and component classes can override base styles. So with that said then, let's add our new component class. We want to add a .btn class in here, and to apply a bunch of class names from Tailwind CSS to a new BTN class, like what we've got here, we can just use the apply directive and paste all of our class names, and Tailwind will go ahead and apply all of these class names to a new BTN class. So then in our code, we can just use this BTN class anytime we want to apply all of these styles. So back in our code then, let's go ahead and implement that. In our pages, chat, and chat ID page, instead of applying all of these Tailwind CSS classes now, we can just apply a BTN class. And exactly the same on our homepage, if we go to pages and index.js, let's remove all of our Tailwind CSS class names and use our new BTN component class name, and do exactly the same for the login button. Let's add that BTN class name. Then back in our browser, if we give it a refresh, nothing would have actually changed because all of the class names and all of the styles are exactly the same. So this is one way we can reuse styles within Tailwind CSS. With that said then, the last thing we need to do is actually capture this user's input using React State. So to finish up this lecture then, back in our code, for our pages, chat, and chat ID page, let's scroll to the top of our chat page component here and add some local state. So let's go const here, and let's create a message text and a set message text state, and set that equal to use state with a default state of an empty string. And don't forget to import useState at the top here from React. Then let's use this message text and set message text for our text area. We want to set the value of our text area equal to message text, and then we want to add an on change handler to our text area. So anytime our input changes for the text area, we want to update our message text state. So we can use the set message state function, passing in e.target.value. Then let's add an onSubmit handler to our form. So let's add onSubmit to our form here, and let's create a new function called handleSubmit. And let's create this at the top here then. Let's go const handleSubmit. And we want to, first of all, e.prevent default, which will stop the form posting to itself, because we're going to be posting to the OpenAI API. However, for now, we just want to console log the value we've got for message text. So let's go console log in here, message text, and let's console log that message text then. Let's save this now and take a look in the browser just to make sure everything is working. Let's open up our console and let's type some test text in here. Let's hit send, and there we go. We're successfully console logging our message text. So in the next lecture then, we're going to make a start on everything to do with OpenAI to be able to actually post our user input to the OpenAI API and stream the response. However, first we're going to need to set up an OpenAI account. So we'll take a look at that in the next lecture. In this lecture, we're going to set up our OpenAI account and generate an API key which will allow us to query the OpenAI API. So first of all, we need to head on over to platform.openai.com and either sign up or log in. And of course, I've already got an account, so I'm going to log into my account. Then from here, we need to go into the View API Keys section once we've logged into our account. So we can access this from the top right-hand drop-down here with your username, and we need to go to View API Keys. Then we need to create a new secret key. So I'm going to hit Create New Secret Key here, and we can give the secret key a name if we want to. However, this is entirely optional. I'm going to name this key though, Chatty Pete just so I know that this belongs to the ChatGPT course and the ChatGPT app is using this particular API key. So then let's hit create secret key. Then we'll be presented with our API key, and it's important to note that this is the only chance we're going to get to copy this API key. As OpenAI says here, you won't be able to view it again. So make sure you copy the API key to your clipboard. Then we need to head on back to our code, and in our .env.local file, we need to create a new environment variable here to store this API key. So let's call this environment variable then something like OpenAI underscore API underscore key and set that equal to the value we copied from our OpenAI dashboard. So now that we've got an OpenAI key for OpenAI, in the next lecture, we're going to create our own API endpoint, which will query the OpenAI API. In this lecture, now that we've got our OpenAI API key, we can begin to set up the foundation to be able to query the OpenAI API. So we're going to need to set up an API route within our app, and from that API route, we will then call the OpenAI API and then stream the response back to the front end. So just like where we added within Pages and the API directory, remember I told you the API directory is a special directory in Next JS, and just like where we added an auth directory which handles all of our auth endpoints for auth 0, let's go ahead and do exactly the same thing, but for chats, because all this app is doing is dealing with chats. So eventually we're going to be creating an endpoint that will handle getting a list of all available chats, as well as getting the messages for a single chat. And now we're going to create an endpoint to send a message. So it makes sense in our API directory, we create a new folder called chat. And within this chat folder then, this is where we're going to create all of our API endpoints associated with chats. So if we create a new file in this new chat directory then, and let's call it sendmessage.js, now what happens is Next.js will create an endpoint for us available now at localhost 3000/API/chat/sendmessage. So this is an API route now. Additionally, this send message API route is going to be an edge function. Now I will explain what edge functions are in a few lectures from now, but for now, let's just code this up first, and then we'll take a step back and actually see what edge functions are and how they differ from quote-unquote normal serverless functions. So the first thing we need to do to make sure that this is specified as an edge function is we need to export a const config object here, and we just need to set the runtime equal to edge. So Next.js will know now that this particular send message API endpoint should be run as an edge function. Then we need to export default async function handler, and this handler function will be passed a request object, and it's on this request object that we can grab any data that we send to this API endpoint. So for now, we're just going to be sending one data item to the send message API endpoint, and that is the message that the user types in the text box. So to grab any data that's passed to this endpoint then, we can destructure it by going const, and it's destructure from await req.json. Then from this await req.json, we can destructure any data passed to our endpoint. So the data we're going to pass to our endpoint is a property called message, which will be a string, and this will equal the string that the user types within the text box before then hitting the send button. So before we go any further then, it's always a good idea to wrap all of our logic in a try-catch within our API endpoints, just in case something bombs out, and we can gracefully handle any errors that may occur within this endpoint. So for now, we're not going to do any error handling here, except for wrapping our code in a try-catch and just console logging for now, something like an error occurred in send message, and let's just console log that error. So now that we've got our basic framework and foundation for our send message endpoint, in the next lecture, we're actually going to query the OpenAI API and return the response from the OpenAI API from the send message endpoint and start receiving it on the client. So we'll take a look at that in the next lecture. In this lecture, we're going to query the OpenAI API from within our endpoint. So it would be a good idea at this stage to head on over to the OpenAI docs and specifically to the API reference and the chat and the create chat completion endpoint. So we're going to be hitting this particular URL here, the api.openai.com/v1/chat/completions. So back in our code then, from within our send message endpoint, we can call the OpenAI API using the OpenAI Edge Stream package. So let's import it at the top here. We want to import OpenAI Edge Stream from OpenAI-Edge-Stream. Then underneath where we're destructuring our message, we want to create a new stream here. So let's go const stream and set this equal to await OpenAI Edge Stream. And the URL we want to hit is the v1 chat completions endpoint. So let's copy this URL here. So it's https api.openai.com/v1/chat/completions. So let's copy this endpoint then and paste it in for the first argument to the OpenAI Edge Stream. Then we need to pass some configuration to this request. So the first thing we need to pass are some headers, and we want to specify that the content type we're going to be posting to the OpenAI API is of type application/JSON. So we need to specify a content-type header and set that equal to application/JSON. And additionally, we need to add an authorization header. And we're going to set this equal to bearer because our OpenAI API key is a bearer token. And we just want to interpolate our OpenAI API key as part of this authorization key. So to quickly remind you, it's this particular environment variable we need to reference, the OpenAI_API_key variable. So back in our send message endpoint then, let's interpolate the process.env.openai_API_key. Then underneath our headers, we need to specify a method, and we're going to set this equal to post. Then we need to send a body, which will contain all the data that we're actually posting to the OpenAI API. So for this, we need to json.stringify a JSON object here, and the data we need to pass, we can find in the create chat completion docs. So we just need to pass minimal data here. We just want to pass a model. We're going to pass an array of messages, but our array of messages will just contain one element in the array. So we're just sending one message for now. And if we scroll down, we need to specify stream equals true because we want to stream our response back. So back in our code then, let's add these properties. The first one we said we needed was to specify the model. And the model we're going to be using is the GPT-3.5-turbo model. Then we need to specify a messages array, and this messages array is just going to contain one element in the array, and each element in the array must contain two keys. So the first key is the content, and the content will contain whatever text we want to send to the OpenAI API. So this will be set equal to the message that we pass to the send message endpoint. So let's set content equal to message, and then we also need to pass a role. So a role can be set to one of three values. It can be set to assistant, it can be set to system, and it can be set to user. So a system role is generally us as developers telling the OpenAI API how we want it to behave. Then an assistant message is any response that comes back from the OpenAI API. So it's OpenAI responding to us. And lastly, a user role is us sending a message to the OpenAI API. So because we're sending a message to the OpenAI API, we need to specify a user role here. Then we want to set the last property. So we want to set stream equal to true. Then we just need to return this stream then. And we can do that underneath where we've declared our stream const here. Underneath this, we can return a new response passing in our stream const. So this pretty much concludes now all the code we need to write to hit the OpenAI API endpoint. So all that's left to do now is to set up our submit handler for our form in our front end. So in our pages, chat and chat ID page, we now need to hit our send message endpoint and make sure everything is working correctly. So we'll take a look at that in the next lecture. In this lecture, we're going to come full circle and we're going to actually hook up our submit handler for our form and post our message to our send message endpoint and hopefully stream a response back from OpenAI. So in our handle submit function then, first of all, we need to update this to an asynchronous function. Then we need to hit our send message endpoint. So to do this, we can go const response and set this equal to await fetch, and we want to hit the /API/chat/send message endpoint. Then we need to pass some configuration to this fetch request. So the first thing we need to pass is the method, and we're going to set the method equal to post. Then we need to set some headers because we need to specify the data we're passing to the send message endpoint is of type JSON. So again, we need to specify a content type on our headers and set that equal to application/JSON. Then we need to pass a body property, and this will be a stringified JSON object. So we can go json.stringify here. And what we want to do is pass a message property to the send message endpoint. And it's important to note that we have to match exactly what we've destructured from our request.json logic here. So we specified, or we're expecting, a message property to be passed to the send message endpoint, which means then we need to make sure that we pass a message property within our body to that endpoint. So we can set message here equal to our message text. So underneath our response then, we need to grab something called a reader from this response, which will read the incoming stream of data coming back from the send message endpoint. So to do that, we can go const data here and set this equal to response.data. Then we want to check to see if there's no data, because if there's no data, then we just want to return, which will quit running this handle submit function. However, if we have data available, we can grab the reader by going const reader and setting this equal to data.getReader. So this reader then will be able to read all the incoming data and the incoming stream from the send message endpoint. So to use this reader then and read the incoming stream from the send message endpoint, we can use the stream reader function from the OpenAI Edge stream package. So we can go await stream reader here, and all we need to do is pass our reader into the stream reader as the first argument. Then the second argument will just be a callback function that will be passed any data that's received from our stream. So in here then, let's grab the message that's returned from the stream, and for now let's just console log that message. So if we save this now then and head on back to localhost 3000, let's give it a quick refresh. And let's type some meaningful message in here. And actually, let's type a question. So let's say something like, what is your name? And let's hit send. And it seems like we're not getting a response back here. So let's see where we've gone wrong back in our code. And in our pages, chat and chat ID page, I've made a mistake here. So we're grabbing the data not off response.data, but we need to grab it off response.body. So if we save this now then and take a look in the browser, let's give it a refresh and let's repeat our message. So let's say, what is your name? And hit send. And there we go. We can see our response was streamed back from our send message endpoint, and we can see multiple console logs here. So we've got this object structure here with an event and some content. And we can see on the content, this is the message that was received back from the OpenAI API. So before we finish this lecture then, let's go ahead and render this content on the screen in our chat window. So back in our code, let's create some local state to store our streamed response. So right at the top of the chat page then, let's create a const incoming message and set incoming message and set that equal to use state, and we'll pass in a default value of an empty string. Then let's render the incoming message right at the bottom here in our chat window. Let's, instead of rendering the hard-coded chat window, let's render our incoming message. And also let's update the text color to text white so it's a little bit easier to read on the screen. Then let's scroll up to our stream reader. Within our callback then, instead of just console logging this message, let's set our incoming message, and we want to continue adding to this incoming message anytime a new chunk of data is streamed from our endpoint. So we can update the existing state in the incoming message and return our new state based on the previous state, i.e. S, and we just want to add the message.content to the previous state. So if we save this now then and take a look in the browser, let's ask another question then. Let's say, what is a dog's favorite food? And hit send. And there we go. We can see our response is streaming back. So now that we've got our requests all set up and running, and we're streaming back a response from OpenAI, in the next lecture then, we're going to continue with our chat window, and we're going to actually make this chat window look more like a conversation. So we're going to add our user message at the start of our chat, followed by the streamed response as a second message in our chat, and we'll style each of those messages appropriately to make them look more like an actual message. So we'll take a look at that in the next lecture. In this lecture, we're going to make our messages look more like a back and forth conversation. So if we refer to the completed project, we can see whenever we send a message to kick off a conversation, we display our little avatar for our profile, as well as the message we sent. Then we'll also render the Chatty Pete avatar or the Chatty Pete logo whenever we get a response back from OpenAI. Additionally, we want to add some loading state to our form down in the footer. So anytime we send a particular message, we're going to make sure that our text area and our send button are disabled, so the user can't send any more messages to this chat while a response is streaming back. So to quickly demonstrate this then, I'm going to add another message to this conversation. I'm going to say something like, what is the deepest sea? And hit send, and there we go. We can see our button and our text area are now disabled, and we can't type anything into the text area, and we can't hit send while the response is streaming back. So we'll also need to implement that functionality. First of all, let's start off with our message styling. Let's head on back to our code and let's create a new message component in our components directory. So let's create a new folder in the components folder and let's simply call it message. Then we want to create a new index.js and a new message.js. Then let's export const message and set this equal to a bare bones React function for now. And let's hardcode message in here. Then in index.js, let's export message from /message. Then what we want to do is back in our pages, chat and chat ID page, we want to set up an array for any new messages we send in this chat. So for example, when we hit the send button, we want to add our message text as a new message in our chat. So to do that at the top here, let's create a const new chat messages and set new chat messages and set this equal to a use state with a default state of an empty array. Then we want to, whenever we hit submit, we want to set our new chat messages by adding the message text as a new message to our new chat messages. So in here then, in our handle submit, we can set new chat messages and let's add to the previous state of these chat messages then. So to do that for an array, we can create a new array here. So we can go const new chat messages and set this equal to an array, but first spread the contents of the previous array. Then we simply want to add a new element in the array after any elements that we previously had in our new chat messages array. So we want to add 3 properties to our new object here. We want to add an ID, the role, and the content. So an ID is just obviously a unique identifier, and all we need this for is when we're rendering from an array in React, we need a unique identifier. So that's why we need to add an ID here. However, the role is going to be exactly the same as the previous lecture. It's either going to be assistant or user. So we're going to have slightly different styling based on if the role is user or if the role is assistant. So if we quickly refer to the completed project, we can see obviously if the role is user, we want to display the user avatar. And if the role is assistant, we want to display the Chatty Pete logo as the avatar, as well as a slightly lighter background color for the message. So back in our code then, first of all, let's add an underscore ID property here, and we can set this equal to UUID, which we need to import at the top here from the UUID package. And the UUID package, all it does is generate a unique ID for us. So we can import v4 as UUID at the top here from UUID. Then we just want to call the UUID function to generate a unique ID for us. Then we need to add our role and our content. So the role in this case is going to be user, because this is a user sent message anytime we hit the send button. Then we want to set the content equal to the message text. So this message text is the text in that text area that the user types in. So now that we've got our chat messages, or our new chat messages, as well as our incoming message being streamed to the front end, let's render these new chat messages and the incoming message as our new message component. So if we scroll down to where we're rendering the incoming message, we can see it's in this particular div here. What we want to do is render any messages that might be in the new messages array first, followed by the incoming message. So above our incoming message then, let's loop over our new chat messages by going new messages.map, and for each message, we want to return our message component. So we need to import this message component then right at the top here from components/message. Then for our message component, we need to add a key prop because we're rendering from an array in React. So our key prop will be set equal to message._id. Then we want to pass the role and the content to this message component. So let's pass a role of message.role and the content equal to message.content. Then we want to do exactly the same thing if we have an incoming message. We want to render it as a message component. So let's copy what we've got for the rendering of our message component in the new chat messages map and paste it underneath the chat messages map. Then instead of just rendering the incoming message by itself here with no styling and things like that, what we want to do is set a role equal to assistant, because remember this incoming message is a response back from OpenAI, so its role will be assistant. Then the content we just want to set equal to incoming message. Then we can remove this key because we're not rendering from an array. So now that we're passing down a role and a content prop to our message component, let's handle that within our message component. Back in our message.js then, let's destructure role and content from our props, and the type of layout we want for our message component is a grid layout. So if we quickly refer back to the completed project again, we're going to have a small fixed width column as the first column in our grid. Then we're just going to fill any remaining space as our second column in the grid. So back in our code then, let's implement this type of layout. On our top level div here, let's add a class name of grid, which will give a display of grid. Then we want grid-calls, and we want the first call to be 30 pixels. Then we want just one FR as that second column. Then let's add a grid gap of 5 with the gap-5 Tailwind class, which will give a 20 pixel gap between each of our grid columns. Then let's just add a padding all round of 5, which will give a padding all round of 20 pixels. So let's add our two columns first then. Our first column will contain our avatar, and our second column will contain our content. So let's first render that content, and let's take a look in the browser before then rendering our avatar. So now that we're rendering our content, let's take a look in the browser at localhost 3000. Let's give it a refresh, and we're already seeing we're rendering a particular message component here because we can see avatar hard-coded. However, this is because we have rendered, if we go back to our pages, chat, and chat ID page, even if we don't have an incoming message, we're rendering the incoming message component. However, we want to conditionally render this. So we'll only render this message component if there's an incoming message. So let's conditionally render this then. Let's check to see if incoming message, and if there is an incoming message, then we'll render that message component. So if we save this now and take a look in the browser, there we go. We're no longer rendering by default the incoming message component. So let's test this out now then. If we submit another message now, so let's say something like, what is your name again, and hit send, it seems we're getting an error here, and it seems like we've got some issue with our logic for our new chat messages. So let's head on back to our code then, and scroll up to where we're handling our submit function. And in our set new chat messages, I've forgotten to return the new chat messages value. So all we need to do is return the new chat messages from the callback to the set new chat messages function. So if we save this now then and take a look in the browser, let's give it a refresh. And again, let's say, what is your name? And hit send. And there we go. We can see we have the user sent message, which is what is your name, followed by the message that was streamed back from OpenAI. And this lecture is getting a little bit long now, so we're going to continue implementing our message component in the next lecture. Continuing from the last lecture then, we're going to finish off our message component. So let's update our logic then to render the user avatar or the ChatGPT logo, depending on what the value of the role is. So back in our code then, for our message component in our message.js, we want to grab the user profile first from the auth 0 user, and that is really easy to do. All we need to do is use the use user hook again. So here we can go const and destructure user from the use user hook, and we need to import the use user hook at the top here from @auth0 /nextjs -auth0 /client. Then we need to perform some logic here where we've got our hard-coded avatar. We want to first check to see if the role is equal to user. If it is, then we'll display the user profile. If the role is equal to assistant though, that's when we'll display the ChatGPT logo. So in here then, let's check to see if role is equal to user. And if role is equal to user, we want to render a image component, and we need to import image at the top here from next /image. And the source to this image will be equal to user.picture. Then we need to set a width and a height of this image. So let's set a width and height of 30 pixels. Let's also add an alt here of user avatar. Then let's add a couple of class names to make this image look a little bit nicer. So let's add a bit of border radius here with the rounded SM class name, which will give a border radius of 2 pixels all around. Then let's add a shadow MD, which will give a box shadow to our image. Then let's add a box shadow color with the shadow black /50. So whenever we use a slash with a particular color in Tailwind CSS, this will give the color some opacity. So we'll have a 0.5 opacity for our black color. So if we save this now then and take a look in the browser, and if at this point you're seeing this error on the screen, cannot read properties of undefined, reading picture, is because user is undefined, which means you're currently not logged in to the app. So in the next lecture, we are going to safeguard the chat root, so it's only accessible for users that are logged into our app, and there's no way that this root is accessible if a user is not logged in. So we will take a look in the next lecture at handling this situation. However, for now, just make sure that you log into your app so you can finish completing this lecture. So once you've made sure you're logged into the app and you're no longer seeing this cannot read properties of undefined error, you should now be seeing a new error. And we can see we have an invalid source prop, and that is because anytime we're using the next image component, we need to specify the domain names or subdomain names that the image components are going to use in our app. So we need to specify s.gravatar.com because that's where our profile picture is hosted, and we need to just add it to our next.config.js. So back in our code then, right at the bottom in the root directory of our project, let's open up our next.config.js, and we need to set an images property, and on the images property we need to set a domains array, and it's in this domains array that we need to add our s.gravatar.com. So if we save this now and take a look in the browser, let's give it a refresh, and then let's say what is your name again and hit send. Now we can see our user avatar was loaded correctly, and we've got that nice little styling that we applied to it with the border radius and the box shadow. So the last thing we need to do now is add our logo for an assistant message, as well as a lighter background color. So back in our code then, for our, if we scroll up here, for our components and message.js, let's dynamically add a class name to our top level div here based on the role of the message. So let's update this then to backticks so we can interpolate a string here. So let's check then to see if role is equal to assistant. And if role is equal to assistant, we just want to add an extra class name here of bggray600. Then we want to check to see if the role is assistant in the avatar column. So let's in here check to see if role is equal to assistant. And if it is, we just want to render another div in here, followed by a font awesome icon. So let's use the font awesome icon component, which needs to be imported at the top here from @fontawesome/react-font awesome. And we need to specify an icon prop here and pass in a particular icon. So we want to use the FA robot icon, which we need to import at the top here from @fontawesome/free solid SVG icons. So we want to add some colors to our icon and our background color for our avatar. So first of all, let's add the background color and associated styles to the wrapper div. First, we want to display flex because we want to be able to centrally align our icon vertically and horizontally within the wrapper. So to do that, we can go items center and justify center, which will vertically and horizontally center our icon. Then let's add a fixed width and height to this div of 30 pixels, just to match the fixed width and height of our user avatar. So here we can go H- and Tailwind doesn't actually come out of the box with a 30 pixel size or class name. So we can open up a set of square brackets here and just type in 30 pixels and do exactly the same for the width. So we can go W- followed by the square brackets, followed by 30 pixels. Then let's copy the styles we've got for our profile avatar. So we want the rounded SM, the shadow MD, and the shadow black/50. So let's just paste all of those classes in here. And we also want a background color for our wrapper div. So let's add a BG gray of 800. Then we just want to update our font awesome icon and add a slightly light green color to it. If we quickly refer to the completed project, and actually we're on localhost 3000 now, we can see how far we've come with our Chatty Pete logo here. So at the moment, we just need to update our Chatty Pete robot logo to a slightly light green color. If we quickly refer to the completed project, it's this light green emerald color here. So back in our code then, for our font awesome icon, let's simply add a class name here of text emerald 200. So if we save this now and take a look in the browser, and there we go, at localhost 3000, we've got the appropriate shade of green for our robot logo. So in the next lecture then, we're going to take a step back because you may have at some point encountered in this lecture that the user is undefined. So if I quickly demonstrate this error you may have seen throughout this lecture, we can do this if we log out of the app, but we can still navigate to localhost 3000/chat. So now if I try and send a message, let's say again, what is your name? And hit send, we can see that we have an error here, cannot read properties of undefined reading picture, because user at this point is undefined, obviously because we're not logged in to our app. So ideally, we want to set up some safeguards here. So if a user isn't logged into our app, then there's no way they should be able to access the /chat page. So in the next lecture, we're going to take a look at handling this scenario. In this lecture, we're going to implement some safeguards and some root protection and only allow logged in users to access the /chat root in our app, as well as only allowing logged in users to access our /chat/send message API endpoint. So first of all, let's start off with the /chat/send message API endpoint. Back in our code then, we can easily implement this with something called Next middleware. And to implement Next middleware, all we need to do is create a middleware.js file in the root directory of our project. So let's go ahead and do that then. Let's create a new file in the root directory of our project called middleware.js. Then all we need to do is export the with middleware auth required function from the auth0 package. So in here then, let's go export default with middleware auth required. But before we go any further, let's first of all import the with middleware auth required function. At the top here, we need to import it from @auth0/nextjs-auth0/edge. Then all we need to do is specify the root that we want to protect. So down here, we can go export const config and set this equal to an object. And we need to pass a matcher property to this config object. And this matcher will be an array. And this is the roots that we want to match and run this middleware function on. So first of all, let's target the API root. So we want to go /API/chat/ and then we want to go : path * in here which will match any path within the API/chat route. So this is going to protect all routes within our API/chat directory. So it's in this directory here. If we go to pages and API, any routes in our chat route. So currently we only have one route or one endpoint, which is the send message endpoint. However, this particular :path asterisk is going to match any endpoint within the API/chat directory and protect all of these routes. So first of all, let's save this and take a look in the browser now at localhost 3000/chat. Let's give it a refresh. And at this point, it doesn't matter if you're logged in or not, because we just want to test our send message endpoint. So let's again type an example message in here. Let's say something like, what is your name again? And then hit send. And we're still getting the error that we received before, which is absolutely fine. That doesn't really matter. However, what matters is we can see our send message post was unsuccessful because now it's returning a 401 unauthorized because I'm currently logged out of the app. And obviously for this to work, you need to make sure you're logged out of the app and navigated to /chat, because if you're logged in, then this send message function would have run perfectly fine. And I'll actually demonstrate this then. If I quickly log back into the app, let's log in and make sure this is working as expected now. So now we should be able to stream a response back because I'm logged in. So let's say, what is your name? And hit send. And there we go. We're successfully streaming a response back as expected. So now all we need to do is add the chat route as a protected route in our middleware. So back in our code then, all we need to do is add another string to this matcher array, and we want to match the /chat route and then do exactly the same thing. So we want to match all routes, including the /chat route, and we want to protect this route as well. So let's go :path asterisk in here. Let's save this now and take a look in the browser. Let's hit logout. Then let's try and navigate to the /chat page. And there we go. We're being presented with the Auth0 login screen because this route is protected. So I'll quickly explain exactly what's going on here in our middleware. So because we're using the middleware from Auth0 here, we've got the with middleware auth required. What's happening is if we're logged out of our app and we're trying to access the /chat page, because we're using the with middleware auth required, then Auth0 is automatically going to prompt us to log into our app because we've protected and specified this route here. And one last thing we need to do to finish this off then is in our components, message and message.js, we still need to cater for just in case the user object isn't set when we're rendering our user profile image. So all we need to do is check to see if role is equal to user for our message, but we also want to check to see if there's a value set for user, and only then will we render the user profile image. So let's also check to see if there's a value set for user, and then that's all we need to do to safeguard and fix the error we were seeing for user being undefined. So now that we've got our safeguard set up for our API and our pages, we're going to continue with the send message functionality, and we're going to implement the loading state whenever we send a particular message. So users can't send any more messages until the response has fully streamed back from the currently sent message. So we'll take a look at that in the next lecture. In this lecture, we're going to implement some loading state whenever we type in a message to the text box and hit send. So back in our code then, within our pages, chat and chat ID page, we want to create some new state at the top here, and we're going to call it something like generating response, and let's add set generating response and set that equal to use state, and the default state will be false. Then whenever we hit the submit button, let's within our handle submit handler then, let's set generating response to true. Then whenever we finish, if we scroll down here, whenever we finished in our stream reader here, after our stream reader has finished and we have no more chunks to receive from the stream, we can set generating response equal to false. Then if we scroll down to our field set, what we can do here is add a disabled attribute and set disabled equal to whatever the value of the generating response is. So if generating response is true, whenever we hit the send button, then this field set will be disabled. And in turn, it will disable the text area and our button. So let's also update our placeholder in our text area. So let's set this dynamically then based on the value of the generating response. So in here then, let's check to see if generating response, and if generating response is true, then we'll just have no placeholder, so an empty string, else we'll have our send a message placeholder. Then let's update our styles for our send button here to target the disabled state. So we can either do it inline on the button tag here, or we can apply the styles to the BTN class. So if you remember, our BTN class is in the styles and the globals.css. Now I think it makes sense that we apply the disabled styles to any buttons throughout our app and not just specific to our send message button. So in our globals.css then, for our .button component class, let's add another Tailwind CSS class in here, targeting the disabled state, and we just want to update the background color of our button to a very light emerald color, so it looks like the button is disabled and can't be clicked. So let's update our disabled state then and add a BG Emerald 200, which is a very, very light green, so it'll look like our button is disabled. And actually thinking about it, 200 is slightly too light, so I'm going to update this to the 300 shade. So let's save this now and take a look in the browser. Let's give it a refresh on localhost 3000/chat, and let's test out this functionality then. Let's say, what is your name again? And then hit send, and there we go. We can see we have our disabled state and we couldn't click into the text area. So one last thing to tidy this up then is it would be ideal if we remove the text that's been typed into the text area whenever we hit the send button. So back in our code then, let's quickly update this. In our pages, chat and chat ID page, if we scroll up to our handle submit function, underneath the set new chat messages function to update our new chat messages state, let's use the set message text state setter and just pass in an empty string to update the message text to an empty string. Then we can just remove this console log for our message text. So let's save this now then and take a look in the browser. Again, let's ask what is your name and hit send. And there we go, our message was removed from the text area. However, you may have noticed, and you may have noticed in a previous lecture, that when we're adding to this new chat page, we can see that any messages that we send are just grouped together at the top here, and our incoming message is just grouped as one message at the bottom. Now, we are going to fix this in a future lecture. However, in the next lecture, I want to update our OpenAI prompt and first of all, prefix all of our OpenAI prompts with a specific system message. So we'll take a look at refining our OpenAI prompt in the next lecture. In this lecture, we're going to refine our OpenAI prompt. So in our pages, API and chat send message endpoint, ideally we want to prefix all of our messages that we send to the OpenAI API with a system message. So the very first message for every single request we send to OpenAI will be prefixed with a system message. So let's hard code our system message before we open our OpenAI stream and before we send our message to the OpenAI API. So let's go const here and let's create an initial chat message const, and the role will be equal to system. And for our content, we're going to tell OpenAI how we want this model to behave. So I'm going to say something like, your name is Chatty Pete, an incredibly intelligent and quick thinking AI that always replies with an enthusiastic and positive energy. You were created by Web Dev Education, and your response must be formatted as Markdown. So if we save this now then and update our body that we're posting to the OpenAI API. So let's add for our messages array, let's add our initial chat message followed by the user message. So if we hit save on this now and take a look in the browser, let's give it a refresh on localhost 3000/chat. Then now let's say, what is your name, and hit send. And there we go. We get a response back saying my name is Chatty Pete. And these two asterisks here are Markdown for bold text. So let's implement then a little bit nicer fonts. For example, if we wanted to generate blog posts or code snippets and things like that, actually let's demonstrate that then. Let's give it a refresh and say something like, tell me how to get started with React JS, include code snippets, and let's hit send on this. And there we go. We can see our response is streaming back as Markdown. So ideally, it would be nice if we actually render this Markdown then into HTML, and we can do that with the React Markdown package. So back in our code then, in our components, message and message.js, ideally what we want to do is render any content for a particular message as Markdown. And this is really easy to do. All we need to do is render the React Markdown component, and we need to import it at the top here from React Markdown /lib/React Markdown. Then we just need to render within the React Markdown component our content. So if we save this now and take a look in the browser, and there we go, we can see our response from OpenAI has been formatted appropriately. However, there still isn't much styling associated with our Markdown. And that is because Tailwind CSS comes with a bunch of reset CSS out of the box, and it completely flattens any styles to do with things like code, H1 to H6 tags, padding tags, etc., etc. So all the styles will be exactly the same for all of those different tags. So we won't have variations in font size, etc., etc. However, to do this is really easy if we're using the Tailwind typography package. So I've included this as part of the starter repo for this course. If we quickly take a look, I've included the Tailwind CSS/typography package. So this is already set up as part of the starter repo. And all we need to do to use all these styles that come out of the box with the typography package is for where we're rendering our React Markdown, for our wrapper div, all we need to do is add a prose class. And because we're rendering on a dark background, we want to add the prose invert class. So this will give a light colored text because our background color is rather dark. So let's save this now then and take a look in the browser again. And there we go. We can see our code snippets are looking a lot nicer. We've got a nice background color for them. And generally our text is formatted in nice paragraphs with spacing between them, etc., etc. So if we refresh our chat page then, and again, type something like, generate me an SEO friendly blog post on dog ownership, and hit send. And there we go. We can see now heading tags are also being rendered with the appropriate font size, and our content is split nicely between different paragraphs. We have list items, we have different variations of heading tags, etc., etc. So one thing to note as well is we can see that if our content is larger than the screen size, then we can see that the content is pushing down our footer here. So in the next lecture, we're going to quickly fix this issue and make sure that our chat window pane here is scrollable if the content fills too much of the height, because we always want our footer to be stuck to the bottom of our page rather than having to scroll down to it. So we'll take a look at fixing this in the next lecture. In this lecture, we're going to fix our slight issue here whenever we have chat messages that fill a height that's greater than the screen height. Then we have to scroll all the way down to the bottom to be able to view our footer. So ideally, we want our chat window to be scrollable, and our footer will always be fixed on the bottom of the screen. So back in our code then, for our pages, chat and chat ID page, we just want to add a couple of classes to our wrapper divs for our chat messages. So for the outermost wrapper div, let's go ahead and add an overflow hidden. Then all we need to do is add an overflow auto or an overflow scroll to our inner wrapper div. So let's add an overflow of scroll to the inner wrapper div. Let's take a look in the browser now, and there we go. That's literally all we need to do to make our chat window scrollable and make sure our footer is always displayed on the bottom of the screen. So in the next lecture then, I think we're in a really good position now to actually start saving our chat messages to conversations stored in MongoDB. So it's at this point as well that we're going to be able to add multiple chat messages to a chat window without the chat breaking. So for example, if I try and add another message to this chat now, for example, just a random message, let's say what are cats, because let's be honest, no one actually knows what cats are. Then let's hit send, and we can see that our message order is messed up here. And if we scroll down, we can see the incoming message is just added to whatever the previous incoming message was. So this will all be fixed when we start persisting our chats to MongoDB. So in the next section, we're going to kick off everything to do with MongoDB But first of all, in the next lecture, we're going to take a quick step back and take a look at what edge functions are. So we'll take a look at an overview of edge functions in the next lecture. In this lecture, I'm going to give you a general overview of edge functions and how they differ to quote-unquote normal serverless functions. And hopefully by understanding at a high level how edge functions work, you'll understand certain design choices I've made that we're going to implement in our edge functions to interact with our database. So first of all, let's first understand how serverless functions work. Now, serverless functions aren't actually serverless. What the term serverless functions means is we don't have to manage a server ourselves. So, for example, when we host on Vercel and in our project directory, we've got a /API/chat/send message API endpoint, then Vercel will automatically know that this needs to be run as a serverless function. Now what that means is, if for example my physical location is in the UK, but my serverless function is hosted in Spain, then whenever we hit the send message API endpoint, our request will be fairly quick to our serverless function in Spain, and the response back from the serverless function will be, again, relatively quick because there's very little physical distance between the two locations from the UK and Spain. Now, serverless functions on Vercel, what happens is when we make a request to a particular endpoint, for example, the send message endpoint, the send message endpoint isn't running constantly on a server in Spain. What's happening is these serverless functions are fired up as and when they're needed. So, for example, if I try and hit the send message endpoint, a new instance of our send message endpoint will be created on the fly. Then all the code within our send message endpoint will be run. Then after finishing running the code in our send message endpoint, that particular instance of our send message endpoint will then be shut down. So we're not constantly running a server that hosts the send message endpoint. So it's created on the fly as and when is needed. So the issue that edge functions is trying to solve is, in our example here, if my physical location is in the UK and our serverless functions are hosted in Spain, the physical distance between the two is not that great, so the physical distance for the request will be fairly quick. However, if my server is hosted in Australia, then there's a huge physical distance between the UK and Australia, so there's potentially a lot of latency and delay between sending the response and receiving a response back from our serverless function. So edge functions essentially act as a CDN where we have a bunch of cached versions all around the globe, and all we're doing is hitting the closest location where our edge functions are hosted. So for example, if my physical location is in the UK and we have an edge function available in Spain, then instead of making the request all the way to Australia, we'll just make the request to Spain. Now, there's one downside to this in that the runtime for edge functions is not Node.js, because Node.js comes with a bunch of overheads and is generally pretty slow to be able to have a distributed cache for our edge functions all around the globe. So edge functions use the V8 runtime, which is a lot more lightweight, but it means that we can't use all the features that we're used to in Node.js. For example, a bunch of node packages. And this also includes not being able to connect to most databases from within an edge function. So to get around this, what we're going to do is, for example, again, let's say our physical location is in the UK. What we're going to do is we're going to hit our serverless function for the send message function. And let's say the closest location is in Spain for our edge function. Then from Spain, what we're going to do is have a separate API endpoint. And it's within that separate API endpoint, which won't be an edge function, it'll be a normal serverless function. It's within that API endpoint that will interact with our MongoDB database. So the big downside to this is that particular endpoint to interact with the MongoDB database will have a physical location. So let's say, for example, that physical location is in Australia. So we've got our physical location, we're hitting our edge function for the send message, and let's say that's in Spain. However, then from Spain, we're going to hit an API endpoint hosted in Australia, which will handle all of our database interactions. But let's say our physical location for our database is hosted in the States. So then we've got to go all the way to the States to interact with our physical location of our MongoDB database, to then receive a response back to Australia, to receive a response back to Spain, to then receive a response back in the UK. So this is a pretty exaggerated example here. Ideally, what we want to do is any serverless functions for our app, we're going to host in exactly the same location as our MongoDB database. So realistically then, if my physical location is in the UK, we'll hit the closest edge function to us, which will be in Spain. Then from Spain, we'll hit our API endpoint that's hosted in the States. And within that API endpoint, we'll interact with our MongoDB database, which is also hosted in the States. So the interaction between our API endpoint and MongoDB will be relatively quick. Then we will receive a response back to Spain in our edge function, and then receive a response back to the UK. So the big key takeaway here is that we can't use all the things we expect from Node.js within an edge function. So we can't connect directly to MongoDB within an edge function. However, we can create a separate serverless function which will do just that, which will run the Node runtime because it won't be an edge function. And we can call that endpoint from within our edge function. So hopefully that doesn't sound too confusing. And again, this is all a very high level overview of how edge functions and serverless functions work. And I'll be honest with you, I don't understand how any of this architecture is made possible and how it's implemented. All I know is that this is a high-level overview of how it works. So under the hood, I have no idea how any of this stuff works. But fortunately for us developers, we don't really need to understand how everything works under the hood. We just need to understand at a high level how things work, and we can base our design and architecture decisions based on this high level understanding. So with that said then, in the next lecture, we're going to make a start on MongoDB, and we're going to actually set up our MongoDB account. So we'll take a look at that in the next lecture. In this lecture, we're going to set up our MongoDB Atlas account. So quickly before we do that, I want to point out that MongoDB can be self-hosted, or we can use the Atlas platform, which will host our database for us. So we don't have to take care of any of the complexities around hosting our own database, because MongoDB Atlas will host our database for us in the cloud. And then all we need to do is connect to that database. With that said then, I've already got an account for MongoDB Atlas. So head on over to mongodb.com/atlas/database and either sign up or log in to an account. So I'm going to log into my account here. Then once you're in your MongoDB Atlas dashboard, we can go ahead and create a new project. Now I'm going to name this project something like Chatty Pete Course. Then let's hit next. Then we'll hit create project. So once our project is created, we want to go ahead and build a database. So let's click on build a database, and we're going to select the free plan here because we're still in the development stage of our app. So let's select the M0 free plan, and let's scroll down here and we can select where we want our MongoDB Atlas database to be hosted. So the region here is referring to the location of the server that's going to host our database. So just like in the last lecture where we were talking about serverless functions and where our MongoDB database will be hosted, what we want to do here is make sure that we select a location that first of all is going to be close to the majority of your users of your app. So obviously at this point, we have no users of our app, so it doesn't really matter what we choose at this point. So for the region here, as we're still developing our app, it'll make sense to select a region that's close to your physical location. And depending on the provider you select, different regions will become available. So I'm just going to select the region that's closest to me. And it's important to note as well that within MongoDB Atlas, when we're creating a database like this, a database is really referring to what's known as a cluster. And a cluster is a collection of databases. And generally, we'll only have one database associated with a particular cluster. So the name here, that's why it's called cluster 0. We can keep it as cluster 0, that's absolutely fine. But just to note that this isn't actually the name of your database. This is the name of the cluster, which can potentially host multiple databases. So with that said then, I'm going to keep the name as cluster 0. So let's hit create, and we want to authenticate with a username and password. So I'm going to keep the default username and password, so the password that was already generated for me. And it's important to note here that it will save you a lot of headache if you don't include any special characters within this password, because our connection string to MongoDB can't contain any special characters, which means if you have special characters in your password, you potentially have to encode just the password portion of your connection string to MongoDB, and it's a bit of a pain in the ass to do that. So I highly recommend that you don't include any special characters in your password. I'm going to keep my password here that was already auto-generated for me. So then let's hit create user. Next, we need to open up our database to certain IP addresses, and only listed IP addresses will be able to access our database. However, we want to open up our database so it's accessible from any IP address. So it's a lot easier to do this from the network access tab. So I'm going to skip over this section for now, but let's hit finish and close. Then we can navigate to the network access here. However, I'm going to go to databases first, just so we can see our cluster all set up here. And again, it's important to note that we don't actually have a database at this point. This is just a cluster which can potentially host multiple databases. With that said then, first of all, we need to open up our cluster so it's accessible from any IP address. And we can do that within the network access tab. So once we're in the network access tab, we can hit this button here, add IP address. Then we can click allow access from anywhere. So this will add a placeholder here of 0.0.0.0/0, which will allow access from any IP address. So then let's hit confirm on this. And it may take a few seconds for our anywhere access IP address to finish setting up. But once we've done that, then let's actually create our actual database. So we can do that within, if we click on the ChatGPT course project here, then we can click on cluster 0. Then we want to click on collections. And it's at this point we want to create our database. So we want to hit add my own data here, and we want to give our database a name. So I'm going to call it something like ChatGPT, and take note of the capitalization here. So we've got capital C and capital P for our database name. This is going to be important when we connect to our database from within our Next JS app. However, we also need to add our first collection name. So collections in MongoDB, if you're not familiar, can be thought of as tables. And within collections, we have something called documents, and you can think of those as just records in a table. So documents in a collection can be thought of as records in a table. And the only collection name we're going to need in this course is chats. So chats will store all the data associated with a particular conversation. So you can call the collection name conversation if it feels more intuitive for you. I'm going to call my collection name chats though, simply because I can't be bothered to type out conversations every time I want to connect to this collection. So I'm going to call it chats, and I'm going to go ahead and hit create. So once our database and our chats collection has finished setting up, all we need to do now is actually connect to our database. So to do that, we can hit the overview tab here for cluster 0. Then we want to hit the connect button here. Then we want to select the connect your application. So let's click on drivers here, and we want to keep this as default. So the driver is Node.js, and we'll have version 4.1 or later. And I've already included the MongoDB NPM package as part of the starter repo for the course. So we don't need to install this driver here as it's already part of the starter repo. But what we want to do is copy our connection string. So let's copy our connection string then, and back in our code, what we want to do is in our .env.local file, we want to add a new environment variable in here to store this connection string. And it's important to note that the environment variable name must equal whatever we have in lib and mongodb.js. So we're referencing a MongoDB underscore URI. So we need to make sure that we have this environment variable, the MongoDB underscore URI environment variable, available in our .env.local file. And it's this MongoDB underscore URI variable which will set equal to our connection string. So in our .env.local then, let's create our MongoDB underscore URI environment variable and simply paste in our connection string. Now we need to update our password here. So it's whatever password you used when we created our user to be able to connect to MongoDB. So all you need to do is type your password here, obviously filling in your actual password. Remember, I kept mine as the auto-generated password, and don't worry because I will be deleting all the accounts associated with this MongoDB database. So the username and password you saw earlier on in this lecture won't actually work to connect to my MongoDB database. However, make sure you fill in the correct password for your username. And from here, this concludes all of the setup we need for MongoDB. So in the next lecture then, we're going to create a new endpoint, which will create a new chat document in the chats collection and store all the messages associated with a particular chat in that document. So we'll take a look at that in the next lecture. In this lecture, we're going to set up a new endpoint to handle creating a new chat and storing it in MongoDB. So anytime a user types a message in the text box and hits send, ideally what we want to do is save that message to MongoDB as part of a new chat. So back in our code then, in our pages, API and chat directory, let's create a new file in here and a new endpoint in here to handle creating a new chat. So in our chat directory then, let's create a new file and let's call it something like create new chat.js. And it's important to note that the create new chat endpoint is going to be slightly different to the send message endpoint because the create new chat endpoint won't be an edge function, which means this will be running in a node environment. So the way we set up this endpoint then is slightly different to the way we set up our endpoint for an edge function. Remember, edge functions do not run in a node environment. So in our create new chat then, let's first export default async function handler. And this handler will be passed a request and a response object. So that's also the difference with edge functions. Edge functions don't receive a response object because remember when we discussed edge functions in the previous couple of lectures, edge functions need to be incredibly lightweight. That's why they don't run in a node environment and also they don't get passed a response object. However, in a node environment, we get passed a request and a response to our handler function for our endpoint. So first of all, what we want to do when we're creating a new chat is we want to grab the currently logged in user. And specifically, we need to access their ID because we need to associate a particular chat in MongoDB with a user. So a chat will belong to a user, which means we need to grab that user ID as a reference. So first of all, let's wrap this in a try catch. So let's add try catch in here. And again, we're just going to console log for now. If there's any errors, just say an error occurred in create new chat and just console log that error then. But within our try then, let's grab the currently logged in user. And remember, exactly the same as our send message endpoint, this create new chat endpoint is only going to be accessible to logged in users because that's what we set up in our middleware. So this particular matcher path, the API/chat/catch-all also covers our create new chat endpoint. So if a user isn't logged in, the create new chat endpoint will return an unauthorized status blocking the user to actually call this endpoint because they won't be logged in. However, if they are logged in then, what we want to do is grab the current user session so we can go const and destructure user here and set this equal to await get session, and we need to pass in the request and the response objects that get passed to the handler. And remember, we also need to import get session at the top here from @auth0/nextjs-auth0. Then what's going to happen is anytime we hit the create new chat endpoint, we're just going to pass the user message to save to this new chat. So it's going to be, if we quickly take a look in the browser, this is the user message in here, whatever the user types in the text box. So we want to pass this message to the create new chat endpoint. So let's grab that then from the request body. And to do that, we can destructure it. So for example, let's say the property that we're going to pass to the create new chat endpoint will be message, which means we can destructure message from req.body. Now again, this is slightly different to edge functions, where if we quickly compare, within edge functions, we need to await req.json to retrieve any data that's posted to the send message endpoint. However, within a node endpoint, we can grab any data that's posted to it from req.body. So they're not too dissimilar, however, there are subtle differences. So with that said then, what we want to do is we want to persist two properties associated with the message. The first will be the content, which will be the message text, and the second will be the role, which will be set to user. So let's construct that object then. In here, let's go const new user message and set this equal to an object. And we just want to set a role equal to user, and the content we'll set equal to the message. Then it's at this point that we want to save this new user message to a new chat. So it's at this point that we're going to connect to our MongoDB database. Down here then, let's go const client and set this equal to await client promise. And we need to import client promise at the top here from lib/MongoDB. And remember, I've included as part of the starter repo for this course, the MongoDB file here. So the lib/MongoDB, I've already included as part of the starter repo for this course. And again, this isn't something, this MongoDB.js, this isn't something I've created from scratch. This is pulled directly from the MongoDB documentation, and I've just included it as part of the starter repo for this course. So we don't have to go to the MongoDB documentation to copy the boilerplate code and then paste it in here. So that's why I've already included it as part of the course. With that said then, in our create new chat, let's connect to our database then. So we have our client here, which is the connection to our cluster. So now we need to go const db and set this equal to client.db, and we need to pass a database name in here, and we can grab this if we go back to our MongoDB Atlas account. If we click on through to our cluster and collections, and our DB name is whatever we named our database here. So I named mine Chatty Pete, and it's important to note as well that this is case sensitive. So if we had all lowercase Chatty Pete when referencing it in our code here for the client.db, then it's not going to work. So this is case sensitive, which means I need a capital C and a capital P for Chatty Pete. So then once we have our reference to our database, we need to reference the chats collection. And specifically, we want to insert one new document to the chats collection. So in here then we can go const chat and set this equal to await db.collection, and we want to reference the chats collection. Then we want to insert one, followed by all the data that we want to insert to the chats collection. So we want to reference a user ID first, and we can grab the user ID from user.sub. Now this user is all the user information associated with our auth0 user, so our currently logged in auth0 user, and this sub just stands for subject identifier. So auth0 call their IDs subject identifiers. So we can use this sub then as an ID reference to our auth0 user. So then we need also to add our messages associated with this chat. And because this is a new chat we're creating here, there'll first only be one message in the chat, and it's this message here, the new user message. So this will be the very first message in our chat. So then let's add that messages then. We can add a messages array here. So we'll open up a new array here, and the array will just have one message in it. So we just want to reference this new user message object. So we'll have one element in our messages array. Then ideally we'll give this chat a title. So ChatGPT actually generates user-friendly titles for their chats. However, we're just going to reference the message, the very first message that was sent as part of a chat for the title. Now, I'll quickly demonstrate as well what I'm talking about for the title. If we take a look in the completed project, it's this section here. So this is the title that we're referencing when we eventually render our list of chats in our sidebar. So that's why we need a title. So I'm just going to set the title equal to the very first message that the user sends to this chat. Then all that's left to do is we just need to return the newly created chat ID from the create new chat endpoint. So to do this, we can go res for response.status 200, which means that this call was successful. So we're adding a status 200 here to inform the clients that posted to this endpoint that this endpoint call was successful. So a status code of 200 means the call was successful. Then we want to pass back some JSON to the client. So we're going to pass an underscore ID and set this equal to chat, which is our reference to the newly created chat document here, dot inserted ID. And this inserted ID is a special MongoDB object ID, which means we need to convert this to a string, and that's super easy. All we need to do is add the toString method on our inserted ID. Then let's also pass the messages and the title that we inserted as the new document. So let's also pass our messages array, just passing in exactly the same data that we saved to the database. So let's pass our new user message in there and our title set to message. Then before we finish this up, let's add a little bit of error handling here. So if anything bombed out in our create new chat endpoint, let's just return a generic status of 500 and a generic message, just so we have at least some sort of error handling here. Now we will be adding to our error handling for everything in our app in a future lecture. However, for now, let's return a response, so an res.status, and let's pass a status code of 500. Then let's pass some JSON with a message to say an error occurred when creating a new chat. So this concludes the code we need to write to save our very first chat to our MongoDB database. So in the next lecture then, we're actually going to test out our new create new chat endpoint and make sure everything is working correctly and making sure that our new chat was indeed saved to our MongoDB database. So we'll take a look at that in the next lecture. In this lecture, we're going to test out our create new chat endpoint and making sure everything is working correctly. Now we're going to test this out from within our pages, chat and chat ID page, in our submit handler. If we scroll up to the top here, in our handle submit function, this is where we're going to test our create new chat endpoint. However, we're only going to test it from the handle submit function. In reality, when we finish up our project, we're not actually going to be running the create new chat endpoint from within the handle submit function. We're going to be running it from within the send message endpoint. So within the send message endpoint, it's at this point that we're going to call our create new chat endpoint. But for now, let's just make sure everything is working with the create new chat endpoint by testing it within our handle submit function, within our pages, chat and chat ID page. So first of all, what we're going to do is just comment out what we've got already where we're fetching our send message. So this is just a temporary comment here, just so we can test out our create new chat endpoint. So let's comment out where we're requesting the send message and we're opening up the stream. And let's close off our comment just above the set generating response. Then instead of fetching the send message API endpoint, now let's hit the create new chat endpoint. So let's go const response and set this equal to await fetch. And we want to hit the /API/chat/create new chat endpoint. Then we want to pass some configuration to this request. So we want to set the method equal to post. Then we need to set some headers as well. And it's exactly the same as what we've already got for our send message endpoint. We need to set the content type equal to application/JSON. So let's go content type in here and set it equal to application/JSON. Then we need to pass some data to this endpoint with the body property. And again, this is going to be stringified JSON. So we can use the JSON.stringify to stringify a message set equal to our message text. So this is pretty much exactly the same as our send message endpoint call. However, now we're calling the create new chat endpoint. So all we need to do then is grab the JSON from this response. And to do that, we can go const JSON and set this equal to await response.json. And again, because our create new chat endpoint is a quote unquote normal serverless function, i.e. it's running within a node environment, then we grab the response by using await response.json compared to response.body when using edge functions. So with that said then, let's console log the JSON response from the create new chat endpoint. Down here, let's go console log new chat and just console log that JSON in there. And now we're in a good position to test this out. So if we head on back to our app then in localhost 3000, let's give it a refresh on the new chat page. And first of all, let's open up the dev tools and specifically the console down here. So let's send a new message in here. Let's say something like, what is your name? And hit send. And we can see that if we take a look in our console logs, I've got some extra console logs in here, but it's this particular console log we want to be concerned with here, this new chat console log. So let's open this up. We can see we've got an ID now for our new conversation or our new chat. We've got a title, which is what is your name, and we've got our messages. So we've got our role set to user and the content is what is your name. Now let's double check this then in our MongoDB Atlas dashboard. Let's go to our cluster 0 and our collections, and let's give it a refresh. And we can see now in our ChatGPT database, in our chats collection, we have a new document in here, and we can see it's got the user ID, the associated user ID, we have a messages array, and we have a title. So now that we've got our MongoDB all set up and we're successfully saving to MongoDB, we're going to make a quick sidestep here, and we're going to implement the sidebar where we can retrieve a list of all of our chats associated with this user, before then continuing with our chat messages. So in the next lecture, we're going to implement an endpoint that will get a list of all chats. In this lecture, we're going to implement our sidebar, and specifically, we're going to create the endpoint that will get a list of conversations for a particular user. Now, the reason I want to sidestep here without coming full circle and finishing up our chat messages is because it's going to be a lot easier to click through to individual chat messages before we can then finish up our messages within a conversation. Additionally, the functionality we're going to implement for this app is whenever we create a new chat, when we're just on the /chat page, so whenever we create a new chat, once the response has finished streaming back from OpenAI, it's at that point we're going to automatically navigate to that particular chat. So then we'll be on the /chat/chat ID page. So it makes a lot of sense that we implement our side panel first, so we know which particular chat we're currently on. And then, like I said, it's going to be a lot easier then, once we've got our side panel in place, it's going to be a lot easier to finish up and come full circle and finish up our chat messages. So with that said then, let's create our new get chat list endpoint. Back in our code, within our pages, API and chat, let's create a new file in here and let's call it getChatList.js. And again, this particular endpoint is not going to be an edge function. It's just going to be a normal serverless function. So it'll be running in the node environment. So here then at the top, we can go export default async function handler, and we'll be passed a request and a response object. Then let's add our logic in here within a try catch. So exactly the same as our create new chat endpoint. What we're going to do is just, for now, what we're just going to do is return a generic message if there was any error within our try. So let's go res.status500.json and just pass a very generic message down saying something like an error occurred when getting the chat list. Then within our try then, what we want to do here is query our MongoDB database for the chats collection where the user ID is equal our currently logged in user. And again, just like our other endpoints that we've implemented, because we've got our middleware set up using the middleware auth required, then only logged in users are going to be able to access our get chat list endpoint. So with that said then, let's grab the currently logged in user. Let's go const and destructure user and set that equal to await get session. And we need to import get session at the top here from @auth0/nextjs-auth0. And we need to pass the request and the response into the get session function. Then we want to connect to our MongoDB database. So let's go const client here and set that equal to await client promise. And we need to import client promise at the top here from lib/mongodb. Then we want to reference our ChatGPT database. So let's go const db and set that equal to client.db, passing in the ChatGPT DB name. Then we need to query our chats. So to do that, we can go const chats in here and set this equal to await db.collection. And we want to query the chats collection. And we can use the find function, passing in an object with a search query. So the query we want to pass here is where the user ID, remember, whenever we create a new chat in our create new chat endpoint, we're saving the user ID on a chat document and we're setting it equal to the currently logged in user. So to query is exactly the same thing. We just need to query where the user ID is equal to user.sub. So back in our get chat list then, we can query where user ID is equal to user. So it's this auth0 user object here, .sub. Then the second argument to the find function is optional here. However, I'll show you a neat little trick here when querying MongoDB. because ideally we just want the ID of the chat and the chat title when displaying within the side panel. So we don't need the associated chat messages to come back as part of this query. So we can omit the messages property and the user ID property when querying for our chats, because we don't need those two properties when rendering in our sidebar. So to do that, we just need to pass another object as the second argument to the find function, and we want to add a projection property here. Now this is just internal to MongoDB. MongoDB is expecting that we pass a projection property whenever we want to filter certain fields when querying our collections. So we need to use the projection property here. Then we just need to pass as properties to this projection object. We just need to pass the fields we want to omit. So we want to set user ID equal to 0 here, which is essentially telling MongoDB, do not bring back the user ID field as part of the chat query for each chat document. And we want to do exactly the same for the messages. So essentially all we're saying is just bring back the ID and the title of a chat, and there's no need to bring back the user ID and the messages as part of a chat for this particular query. So ideally, we want our chat sorted from latest, so the latest chat, to the oldest chat in our chat list. So all our latest chats will appear at the top in our sidebar. So to do that, we can use the .sort function on our find query. And all we need to do is pass an object to the .sort function. And we want to specify which field we want to sort by. So it's going to be the _ID field. Then we just need to pass -1, which will sort our records from latest to oldest. Now, the reason we can sort by ID in MongoDB is because IDs in MongoDB are based on timestamps, which means we're able to sort then latest to oldest just using the ID. Then the last thing we need to do is convert the results coming back as part of the find query to an array, because the find query returns something called a cursor in MongoDB, which is essentially a pointer to our results rather than the actual results, which means then we need to convert it to an array. Again, this is super simple to do. All we need to do is use the toArray function. Then we just need to return these chats. So let's go res.status in here and set this equal to 200. Then we want to pass some JSON down to the client, and let's just pass those chats down as our response to the get chat list. So if we save this now then, and head on over to our components and our chat sidebar and our chat sidebar.js, because it's within this chat sidebar that we want to query our chat list. So in here then, let's add a use effect hook, because anytime our chat sidebar mounts, we want to request the chat list. So within this use effect, let's create a const load chat list function and set this equal to an asynchronous function. Then we want to create a const response and set this equal to await fetch. And we want to fetch API/chat/get chat list. Then we want to configure this request. And all we need to do is set the method equal to post. Then let's grab the JSON from this response. So we can go const JSON and set that equal to await response.json. Then for now, let's just console log our result. So let's go console log in here, chat list, and let's console log that JSON result. Then all we need to do is call this load chat list function then within our use effect. So let's run the load chat list function, and also remember to import use effect at the top here from React. So let's save this now then and take a look in the browser. Let's give it a refresh on localhost 3000/chat. And there we go. We can see we're console logging our chat list. We have our list of chats, and obviously at this point, I've only got one chat in my chats collection, but we can see we've got our chat title and our chat ID. So in the next lecture then, we're going to actually render the list of chats within our sidebar. In this lecture, we're going to render our list of chats for the currently logged in user within our chat sidebar. So first of all, let's take note of our console log here. Coming back as part of our get chat list endpoint, we have an object with a chats property, and it's this chats property that we're going to need to work with when rendering our list of chats in our sidebar. So back in our code then, in our components, chat sidebar and chat sidebar.js, what we want to do is add some local state to our chat sidebar to store our list of chats. So in here, let's go const chat list and set chat list and set this equal to use state, passing in a default value of an empty array. Now remember to also import use state at the top here from React. Then after our chat list has loaded, On our JSON then, we need to access that json.chats property, which contains the array of chats. So in here then, let's go set chat list, and let's set chat list equal to json.chats. And what we want to do here is optional chain chats, just in case JSON may be null or undefined, but also if this entire expression here evaluates to null or undefined, let's just default to an empty array. So then all we need to do is loop over our chat list within our chat sidebar. First of all, if we quickly refer to the completed project at our chat sidebar, we can see we have a 3-section layout for this sidebar. So we have at the top here a new chat button, which sticks to the top of the sidebar. We also have this logout button, which sticks to the bottom of the sidebar. And then in between, we have a scrollable list of chats. So to achieve this type of layout then, we need to make sure that the sidebar has a display of flex and it has a flex direction of column. So back in our code then, let's update our wrapper div here to display flex and flex col. And let's also have an overflow of hidden. So this will allow us to have that middle scrollable section for our list of chats. So we want to render our list of chats above our logout link, but we also want to add another link or another button, which will navigate us to a new chat page. So it's this new chat button here. So first of all, let's start off by creating this new chat link. Back in our code, let's duplicate our logout button, but instead let's add a label of new chat, and this new chat link will navigate to simply /chat. Then between the new chat and the logout link, we need to render our list of available chats. So let's add a wrapper div in here, and we want to add a class name of flex1. So what will happen is the middle section here, our scrollable list of chats, will fill all the remaining space between the height that the new chat and the logout button take. So again, let's quickly refer to the completed project, adding a flex1 here to our middle section for our list of chats. We'll make sure that the list of chats will indeed fill this entire area, and it will essentially push the logout button to the bottom, and obviously the new chat button will still remain at the top. So back in our code then, we want this particular section to have an overflow of auto, which means our chat list will be scrollable if there are too many items in the list. So let's go overflow auto here, and let's have a slightly different background color to the background color of the sidebar. So let's add a slightly darker shade. So let's go BG gray 950 here, just so there's a slight variation and it's slightly more noticeable that we have a different color for our background for our new chat button, as well as that logout button. So back in our code then, let's loop over each of our chats. So in here we can go chatlist.map. So for each chat then, we're just going to return a next link component. And because we're rendering from an array in React, we need to set a key prop to this link component. So let's set that equal to chat._id. Then let's add a label for this link then, and this will be equal to chat.title. Then we need to add an href to this link. So let's navigate to /chat/ followed by the chat ID. So in here we can go chat._id. So let's save this now then and take a look in the browser. We can see we have our new chat button, and at the bottom here we have our logout button, but we also have now our list of chats, and obviously I've only got one chat in my list of chats, but we can click on through to this particular chat and we get navigated to the chat/chat ID page. And it's exactly the same component that's rendering for a new chat or an existing chat. So we can also click on through to new chat, which will take us to the just/chat page, which is a new chat. So now that we've got the framework set for our chat sidebar, in the next lecture, we're going to style our sidebar items to make them look a little bit nicer and make them look more like the completed project. So we'll take a look at that in the next lecture. In this lecture, we're going to style our sidebar items to make them look more like clickable buttons and to make them look more like the completed project, as well as prefixing them with appropriate icons. So back in our code then, because we're going to be reusing the same styles for the new chat button, for the logout button, and for each of our chat list items, it makes sense that we create a common component class in our styles and globals.css. So just like what we did with the button class, let's also create a side menu item, and let's apply a bunch of Tailwind CSS class names to this side menu item. So first of all, before we do that though, let's apply the side menu item class to the appropriate elements in our chat sidebar. So let's open up our chat sidebar again, and we want to apply this new side menu item class to the new chat, to the logout, and to each chat item. So let's go ahead and do that then. Let's add a class name of side menu item for the new chat. Then let's copy and paste for the logout and for each rendering of our chats. So then let's add a bunch of Tailwind classes to the side menu item. Let's use the apply directive. And first of all, let's add some margin and padding. So let's add a margin all round of 2, which will give a margin all round of 8 pixels. Let's add a P2 as well, so that will give a padding all round of 8 pixels. Then let's add a display flex and an items center, because we're going to be rendering an icon and a label within each side menu item. So having a display of flex will make sure that the icon and the label will display side by side, and item center will make sure that they display side by side, but also align horizontally. Then let's add a gap 4, which will give a gap of 16 pixels between the icon and the label. Let's add a rounded MD, which will give a border radius of 6 pixels. Then let's target the hover state and add a different background color. So let's add a BG gray of 800. So if we save this now and take a look in the browser, there we go. We can see our logout link, our new chat link, and our chat list links are starting to look way more like the styles of the completed project. From here then, let's prefix each label with an appropriate icon, starting with the new chat. So we want to add this plus icon from Font Awesome for the new chat. So back in our code then, back in our chat sidebar.js, let's prefix the new chat label with a Font Awesome icon. And remember, we need to import the Font Awesome icon component right at the top here from @fontawesome/react-fontawesome, and we need to pass an icon prop, and we're going to use the FA plus icon, and we need to import that at the top here from @fontawesome/free-solid-svg-icons. So if we save this now and take a look in the browser, at localhost 3000, there we go. We can see we're rendering our icon for our new chat button. So let's move on now to each chat in our list. Let's add some comment icon for this one. So let's copy what we've got for our FA plus for the new chat, and instead let's paste it for each item in our chat list. But let's update this now. Instead of FA plus, let's use a message, and we need to import FA message as well at the top here from @fontawesome/free-solid-svg-icons. Then we may as well go ahead and finish this off then for our logout link. So let's prefix the logout label with an FA right from bracket icon. And again, we need to import the FA right from bracket icon at the top here from @fontawesome/free-solid-svg-icons. So let's save this now and take a look in the browser. And there we go. We can see our icons are all rendering successfully. Ideally though, we want our new chat button to have a green background color to match all of our other buttons. So this is a type of call to action. We want the new chat button to be a bit more noticeable compared to everything else in our sidebar. So let's update this then back in our code. If we scroll up to our new chat button, let's simply add to our class names here, as well as the side menu item, let's add a BG Emerald 500 to match our button colors, and then let's add a hover state of BG Emerald 600. So if we save this now then and take a look in the browser, and there we go, our chat button is looking a lot nicer. And I quickly want to point out as well that this goes back to one of the earlier lectures in this course where I mentioned that utility classes in Tailwind CSS can override component classes. So if we quickly refer to the hierarchy in globals.css, the side menu item is a component class. However, utility classes can override any component classes or component styles. So that's exactly what we've got here. We've got our two utility classes overriding the base styles within our side menu item class. And at this point, you may be seeing incredibly large Font Awesome icons, and this issue happens due to server-side rendering within React. However, we can easily fix this situation by going back to our code, and in our pages and _app.js, we need to import config from @fontawesome/fontawesome-svg-core. Then we need to import @fontawesome/fontawesome-svg-core/styles.css. Then we need to set config.autoaddCSS equal to false. So if we hit save on our _app.js then we head on back to the browser at localhost 3000, and there we go. We can see our icons now are rendering correctly. So now that we've finished our side menu and our chat sidebar, we can move on to now coming full circle and finishing off our chat functionality. So ideally, when we're on the new chat page, whenever we send a message, we will then wait for a response from OpenAI. We'll also store the response from OpenAI in our MongoDB database, but then we'll automatically navigate the user to that particular chat, as well as reloading our chats in our sidebar, so that new chat is also loaded as part of our sidebar. So we'll start taking a look at all of that in the next lecture. In this lecture, we're going to circle back to our chat functionality, and what we're going to do is save our user sent message to MongoDB within our send message API endpoint. Additionally, we'll also save the message that OpenAI responded with to our MongoDB database. So back in our code then, if we open up our pages, chat and chat ID page, what we want to do is move our request to the create new chat endpoint from our handle submit on our front end, and we need to move it to our pages API, chat and send message endpoint. So in our chat ID page then, let's cut what we've got where we're posting to the create new chat endpoint, and then let's uncomment then where we're sending our message. So this was our original functionality where we hit the send message endpoint with the user sent message, and then we're streaming back a response. So if we hit save on our chat ID page, but within our send message endpoint then, what we want to do is before we hit the OpenAI API, we want to create a new chat. So let's paste our request to the create new chat endpoint above where we're opening up our stream from OpenAI. However, when we're referencing our API endpoint server side, we need to provide a domain name as well. So we can't just fetch using /API. We need to prefix this with our domain name. So obviously this will depend on if we're working on localhost, it will be localhost 3000. If we're working in production, then it will be the domain name of our production site. However, all we need to do is reference the domain name from the client that hit this send message endpoint. So in here, we can interpolate a string before the /API, and we can access req.headers.get, and we want to get the origin header. So when we're working locally in our development environment, this origin will equal localhost 3000. So we'll hit the localhost 3000 /API/chat/ create new chat endpoint. Additionally, because we protected all routes within the API/chat directory, so this is a protected route, the create new chat endpoint, then we need a way to provide the create new chat endpoint with information on the currently logged in user. Now this is stored via a cookie, so we can access the cookie from our send message endpoint and pass it to the create new chat endpoint. So we can do this within our headers. We can set a cookie header in here, and we can do exactly the same thing. We can set it equal to req.headers.get cookie. Then we need to pass the message to the create new chat endpoint. And from our front end, this was the message text. However, we're passing a message property to the send message endpoint. So we just need to reference message for our body to the create new chat endpoint. Then what we want to do is, if we quickly remind ourselves in the create new chat endpoint, what we're doing is when we successfully save a new chat to the chat collection, we're then returning an ID, the messages, and the title for that chat. So what we need to do is grab this ID from the response within our send message endpoint. So in our JSON here, we can grab the ID of the newly created chat. Then what we want to do is, when we're finished streaming from OpenAI, we want to grab the full message that was streamed back from OpenAI and also persist that to MongoDB. So we can then access the chat document with the chat ID and add the streamed message to our chat. So first of all, let's create a const chat ID here and set it equal to json._id. Then we need to access this chat ID after we finish streaming. So the OpenAI Edge stream allows us to pass a third argument to the function. So our first argument was the URL, our second argument was the configuration for the request. Then we can pass a third argument here. And on this third argument, we can hook into the onAfterStream function, and we can pass a callback function to the onAfterStream. So this will be an asynchronous function. And within this asynchronous function then, the OpenAI Edge stream will pass two properties to this callback function. So it will pass emit and it will pass full content. So emit will allow us to emit one last message to the client and stream one last chunk of data to the client after the stream is finished. And full content is just the full content of that stream. So it's at this point within the onAfterStream event that we want to add the full content to our newly created chat. And also, we're not going to need the emit function because we're not going to need to send a message onAfterStream. But just in case you do, there is an emit function which will allow you to send one last message back to the client. So because we don't need the emit function, let's remove the emit function. However, we do need this full content. So in onAfterStream then, we want to add this full content to our newly created chat. And because we can't directly connect to MongoDB within our send message edge function, we're going to have to create another API endpoint which will handle saving a message to an already existing chat. So we'll take a look at creating this new endpoint in the next lecture. In this lecture, we're going to create a new API endpoint which will save a new chat message to an already existing chat. Then we'll implement it for our onAfterStream function and save the full response or the full content that came back from OpenAI and save that content as a new message to our newly created chat. So in our pages, API and chat directory then, let's create a new file in here and let's call it something like add message to chat.js. Now again, this is going to be a normal serverless function here, so we'll be running this within a node environment. So up here then we can go export default async function handler, and this handler function will be passed a request and a response object. Then let's wrap our logic in a try catch, exactly what we've done for all of our previous API endpoints. We've wrapped our logic in a try catch. So again, let's just return a generic error if anything in our try bombs out. So let's go res.status, passing in a status of 500 and a JSON object with a message property to say an error occurred when adding a message to a chat. Then in our try then, what we want to do is connect to our MongoDB database. So first of all, we need to grab the currently logged in user. So let's go const and destructure user at the top here and set that equal to await get session. And we need to import get session at the top here from @auth0/nextjs-auth0. And we need to pass the request and the response objects into the get session function. Then we need to connect to our MongoDB database. So let's go const client and set this equal to await client promise. And we need to import client promise at the top here from lib/mongodb. Then let's reference our database. So let's go const db and set this equal to client.db. And we need to reference the chatty Pete database. Then we want to grab the data that's posted to the add message to chat endpoint and save it to our MongoDB database. So we're going to pass 3 data items to the add message to chat endpoint. The first will be the chat ID that we want to save the message to. The second will be the role of the message, i.e. it will either be user or assistant. And the third will be the content of the message. So here then, let's destructure each of those data items. Let's go chat ID, role, and content. And we need to destructure that from req.body. Then we want to update this particular chat ID and add to our messages array for that chat a new message with the role and the content that's passed to the add message to chat endpoint. So here we can go const chat and set this equal to await db.collection, and we want to reference the chats collection, and we want to find one and update. So we need to pass an object to the first argument of the find one and update function, and the first argument will be the search criteria to find the particular document that we actually want to update. So first of all, we want to find the chat whose ID is equal to the chat ID that we pass to this endpoint. So in here then we can go underscore ID, and we want to create a new object ID here, and we need to import object ID at the top here from MongoDB. Now remember, I said all IDs in MongoDB are object IDs, which means we need to convert the string ID that we pass to this endpoint into an object ID. So to do that, all we need to do is create a new object ID here, passing in the string chat ID to the object ID. So then this object ID will convert our string to an actual MongoDB object ID. Then we want to make sure as well that we find the document whose user ID belongs to the currently logged in user. So we want to set user ID equal to user.sub. Now the reason we need this particular part here, and this is actually a very important part, is because if we didn't have this user ID match here, then any logged in user could potentially update a different user's chat. That's why we need to make sure that users can only update chats that belong to them. That's why we need to match the user ID as well. Then the second argument to the find, one, and update function will be the operation we want to perform on this document. Now this is MongoDB specific syntax here, so we can use the $push because we want to push to an array. So we need to specify an object here with the fields that we want to update. So we want to update the messages field, and we want to push a new element to this messages array. So all we need to do is pass then the data that we want to push as a new element to this messages array. So we need to pass the role and the content. And remember, we're destructuring both of these at the top here from req.body. Then we want to specify a third argument to the find, one, and update function. And we just want to specify that after this operation has completed, after we've updated our document, we just want MongoDB to return that document. So we can just pass as a third argument to the find, one, and update. We can pass an object with the return document property and set that equal to after. So again, this is MongoDB specific syntax here. So all we're saying here is to return the document after we've finished updating it. So we're returning the newly updated document rather than the original document before it was updated. Then we just need to return this chat then from the add message to chat endpoint. So here we can go res.status 200.json. So let's pass a chat property as part of the JSON result. And we just want to spread the chat.value. So remember, we're setting chat at the top here. So our newly returned document, we want to spread all the properties from that chat document then within our chat object here. So we're spreading chat.value, but we also need to update the ID. We need to convert the ID to a string. So let's go _ID and set that equal to chat.value._ID.toString. Then let's hit save on this and call our new endpoint in our send message endpoint. So in our on after stream then, in our send message endpoint, let's go await, fetch, and again, we want to grab the origin off of our headers here. So let's go req.headers.get origin. Then we want to hit the /API/chat/add message to chat endpoint. Then as the second argument to fetch, let's add our configuration for this request. So the method will be equal to post. Then we need to add some headers. We need to add the content type set equal to application/JSON. And we also need to set a cookie, and we need to set that equal to req.headers.get, and we need to get the cookie header. Then we need to pass some data to the add message to chat endpoint then. So let's pass some data as well, and this will be stringified JSON. And the data we want to pass is the chat ID, the role, and the content. Just like what we've destructured from our add message to chat endpoint, we need to pass the chat ID, the role, and the content. So in our send message endpoint then, let's pass the chat ID. And remember, we already have access to this chat ID here because we set it equal to the response coming back from the create new chat. So we already have access to the chat ID here. Then we want to set the role equal to assistant because this is the response from OpenAI. Then we want to set the content equal to full content. So it's this full content here that's passed to us within the on after stream callback function. So one last thing we need to do to finish this entire function off then is ideally we want to pass to the client the newly created chat ID, because after we receive a response from OpenAI on the client, we then want to navigate to that particular page, that particular chat ID page. So as well as on after stream, we can pass an on before stream, and in the callback function to on before stream, just like the on after stream, we have access to an emit function. So all we need to do is emit a new message to the client before our stream opens. So let's go emit here. And the first argument to emit will be the message. So we just want to pass the chat ID Then we need to specify an event ID. So let's say something like new chat ID in here. Then what we can do is in our client then, if we scroll down to our pages, chat and chat ID page, in our stream reader, in the callback to our stream reader, we should now see coming back in our console log here for our message, we should see the very first object that gets streamed to the client. It should have an event ID of new chat ID, and the content will be the actual chat ID. So let's save this now then and take a look in the browser at localhost 3000/chat. Let's open up our DevTools and make sure we've got our console open. Then let's add some message in here. Let's say, what do dogs eat? Then hit send. And I'm getting an error here because I'm still console logging a const that doesn't exist anymore. So if I scroll up to where I'm console logging that JSON, let's just comment out that console log. Let's hit save now, and then I'm going to refresh in the browser. Again, on the /chat page, so the new chat page, let's say, what do dogs eat? Then hit send, and there we go. We can see our response is streaming back, but we also have our response prefixed with our chat ID. So ideally, once this response is finished streaming back, first of all, we don't want the chat ID to be part of the incoming message that we render on the screen. But we also then want to, whenever our stream is finished, we want to navigate to /chat/ followed by this chat ID. So we'll take a look at cleaning this up in the next lecture, but quickly before we do that, let's take a look in our MongoDB Atlas and make sure that our new chat was saved correctly. So we can see we have a what do dogs eat chat in here. So let's open up our messages. We can see now we have two objects or two elements in our array of messages. Let's open up the first one. We can see that this was a user role and we asked what do dogs eat. Then the second one, we can see we have a role of assistant and the content is the response that came back from OpenAI. So in the next lecture then, we're going to tidy up our response and make sure that the chat ID isn't part of the rendered incoming message. And then after we finish our stream, we're going to navigate to /chat/chat ID. So we'll take a look at that in the next lecture. Continuing from the last lecture then, in this lecture, we're going to clean up our send message functionality. So if we quickly remind ourselves, let's add a new message in here for a new conversation. So let's say something like, what do cats eat? Then hit send. And currently we're getting our message streamed back, but it's prefixed with the newly created chat ID. So first of all, let's take a look in our console logs. Let's scroll right to the top of our console logs. And we can see that the very first message console log has an event ID of new chat ID, and the content is equal to the chat ID. So if we quickly remind ourselves back in the code then, for our pages, chat and chat ID page, if we scroll down to our stream reader, we're console logging every chunk of message that gets streamed to the front end. So ideally, we want to tap into the event type and only set the incoming message if the event type is not equal to new chat ID, or if the event type is just equal to event. So again, if we take a look in our console logs, normal streamed content back from OpenAI just has an event ID of event, but this new chat ID is something we set up, so we don't want to add this to the streaming incoming message. If we head on back to our code then, let's check in here in our callback to our stream reader, if message.event is equal to new chat ID, then we want to add the new chat ID to a new state item, which we'll create in a second. However, any other event we'll just add to the incoming message. So we'll just add the content of any other event to the incoming message. However, if the event type is equal to new chat ID, then let's create some new states at the top of our chat page function then. Let's create a const new chat ID and set new chat ID and set that equal to use state with a default state of null. Then let's scroll down to our stream reader again. And if the event is new chat ID, let's set new chat ID equal to message.content. So to navigate to our new chat page then, instead of navigating to our new chat page, after our stream has finished, we're going to use a use effect hook to navigate to our new chat page. And the reason for this is because if we navigate away from our new chat page, while a message is still streaming, then this function is still running, and we could potentially navigate to the new chat page while the user is not expecting it. So we only want to navigate to the new chat page if this component is still mounted. So to do that, we can go to the top of our function here and add a use effect hook, and we need to import use effect at the top here from React. Then in the callback to use effect, we just want to pass a couple of dependencies to the use effect hook. So we want to pass new chat ID and generating response. So anytime each of these values change, our use effect hook will rerun. So in here, let's check to see if generating response is false. And if we have a new chat ID, then we can navigate to that new chat page. So first of all, let's reset the value of the new chat ID. So let's go set new chat ID equal to null. But then we need to navigate to this new chat ID page. So at the top here, we need to use the next router. So we can go const router and set that equal to use router. And we need to import the use router hook at the top here from next/router. Then we simply need to use the router within our use effect. So we also need to pass the router as a dependency to our use effect hook, but then we can use it within our use effect hook. So we can go router.push, and we just want to navigate to /chat/new chat ID. So if we save this now then and take a look in the browser, let's give our new chat page a refresh, and let's type another question. Let's say, what's the oldest dog, and hit send. Then let's observe then once our stream has finished, we then get automatically navigated to the /chat/chat ID page. However, you may have noticed that our sidebar hasn't refreshed. So ideally we want the new chat to also appear in the sidebar. So we need to reload our sidebar items. And additionally, if we click on through to a particular chat now, we can see we're navigating to different chat IDs. However, our old messages are still displaying for the previous chat. So we're not loading at the moment any messages belonging to a particular chat, and we're still only rendering the previous messages of our new chat. So at the moment, we don't have an endpoint to handle sending a message from our front end to an existing chat. So we also need to cover that functionality as well. However, first of all, let's work on our sidebar and reload our chat messages anytime we create a new chat. So we'll take a look at that in the next lecture. In this lecture, we're going to reload our chat list in our sidebar anytime we create a new chat. So whenever we create the new chat, it will automatically appear in our sidebar. So back in our code, this is really easy to do. What we can do is anytime our route changes, so anytime we navigate to our newly created chat, what we can do is create another use effect hook within our chat sidebar component, and anytime the chat ID changes, we'll just reload our list of chats. So in our components and chat sidebar, we want to pass the chat ID down as a prop to the chat sidebar. So let's do that then, where we're rendering our chat sidebar in our pages, chat and chat ID page. Let's find where we're rendering the chat sidebar. And what we need to do is pass the chat ID of the current route down as a prop to the chat sidebar. However, at the moment, we don't have access to that ID. So we need to add some get server-side props to our chat ID page, and then pass down the chat ID from the parameters of this page down into the props for our chat ID page. So down here, we can go export const get server-side props and set this equal to an async function, and this get server-side props will be passed a context object, and it's on this context object that we can grab the ID of the chat page that we're currently on. So we can grab the chat ID from the params of this page. So we can go const chat ID here and set this equal to ctx.params, and just in case there's no params that exist for this route, i.e. we're on the new chat page, so we don't have access to a chat ID, we want to optional chain this. But if there are params, we want to access the chat ID param, and this chat ID has to be spelled exactly how we spelled the chat ID param for our file name. So if this was ... Jim, for example, we'd need to access Jim from our params. However, we used the chat ID label for our param. So let's access chat ID. And this is going to be an array because this is a catch-all route. So there could be multiple params for this route. However, we know there's only ever going to be one. So we just need to access the first element in the array. But just in case chat ID doesn't exist, we'll optional chain that as well. Then we want to grab the first element in the array. Then we simply want to pass down the chat ID as a prop to our chat ID page. So here we can return an object with a props property, and we simply want to pass down chat ID. Now, if for any reason this evaluates to null or undefined, we just want to default our chat ID to null because we can't pass undefined as a prop to our page components. However, we can pass null as a prop to our page components. So that's why we want to default to null just in case our chat ID doesn't exist. So then we can grab this chat ID then from our props at the top of our component here in our chat page component. We can now grab this chat ID. So we can pass this chat ID now then down into, if we scroll down to our chat sidebar, let's pass it down as a prop to our chat sidebar. Then in our chat sidebar, we have access to the chat ID in our chat sidebar component. We just want to rerun our load chat list anytime the chat ID changes. So this is as simple as passing the chat ID into the dependency array for our useEffect hook. So anytime the chat ID changes, we will rerun our load chat list. So if we save this now then and take a look in the browser, let's give it a refresh on localhost 3000/chat. Let's add another message in here. Let's create another conversation. So let's say, what's the oldest cat? Then hit send. So after we finish streaming, we can see we navigate to the chat slash followed by our chat ID page. But now we've also reloaded our chat list and we can see we have what's the oldest cat in our sidebar. So before we finish up this lecture then, I think it's a good idea while we're doing everything to do with the chat ID, let's highlight the current chat that we're on in our sidebar. So ideally, when we're on a particular chat, we want to highlight it in the sidebar so it's obvious which chat we're actually accessing. So back in our code then, in our chat sidebar, if we scroll down to where we're rendering our chat list, let's add some dynamic class names to our link. So let's render this within backticks here. So as well as the side menu item, we want to interpolate here and check to see if the chat ID that we pass down as props to this component is equal to the chat._ID, so this particular element in the array. And if it is, we want to add a background color to this particular link so it's obvious that this is the currently accessed chat. So let's just add a BG gray of 700. So if we save this now and take a look in the browser, and there we go, we can see we have our chat highlighted in our sidebar. However, we still have the different color when we hover over, even though we have this active class whenever we're accessing this chat. So let's add a hover color as well. If we're highlighting this particular link, let's also add a hover BG gray 700. So let's save this now and take a look in the browser. And there we go. We can see we're successfully highlighting the currently accessed chat. So if we click on through to different chats, we can see the chat ID changes in our address bar, and we're highlighting the appropriate chat in our sidebar. So in the next lecture then, we're going to start loading our chat messages for a particular chat, because at the moment we're not doing anything to load chat messages belonging to a particular chat. So we'll take a look at this in the next lecture. In this lecture, we're going to load a particular chat's messages. So if we click on through to a particular chat, what we want to do is load those messages associated with that particular chat. So back in our code then, for our pages, chat and chat ID page, if we scroll down to where we're getting our server-side props down here, this is an ideal location to load the messages associated with this particular chat. So first of all, we only want to load chat messages belonging to a chat only if there's a chat ID available. Otherwise, remember what we said was, if there's no chat ID available, then we're assuming that this is just the new chat page rather than an existing chat page. So first of all, let's check to see if a chat ID exists. And if a chat ID exists, it's at this point we want to connect to our MongoDB database and grab this chat from our database. And of course, to be able to do that as well, we need to grab the currently logged in user. So first, let's go const and destructure user and set that equal to await get session. And we need to import get session right at the top here from at auth0/nextjs-auth0. So if we scroll back down to our get server-side props, then we need to pass in the request and the response objects to the get session function, and we can grab that of CTX. So we can go ctx.req and ctx.res. Then we want to connect to MongoDB. So let's go const client and set that equal to await client promise. And we need to import client promise again, right at the top here from lib/MongoDB. Then after our client promise, let's reference our database then. So let's go const db and set this equal to client.db. And we want to reference the chatty Pete database. Then we want to grab the chat by ID. So let's go const chat and set this equal to await db.collection. And we want to reference the chats collection. Then we simply want to find one where the user ID is equal to user.sub and the underscore ID is equal to our chat ID. And remember what we did in previous lectures, this needs to be an object ID, so a MongoDB object ID. And all we need to do here then is create a new object ID, and we need to import object ID right at the top from MongoDB. Then what we want to do is pass in our string chat ID. So this object ID function will convert our string chat ID into a MongoDB object ID. Then we want to move where we're returning our props here. Let's move this up into our if statement. So we're returning, if there's a chat ID, we'll return the chat ID, and we're going to return the chat title and the chat messages. However, if there's no chat ID, we'll just return an empty object with an empty props object. However, if we do have a chat ID, we want to pass down the chat ID, we want to pass down the chat title, so we can set this equal to chat.title, and we need the associated messages for this chat, so we can go chat.messages.map, and for each message then, we want to return the message object, but because all we're doing is saving our messages as an array in MongoDB, each of these message elements don't actually have an ID associated with them. So we can assign a temporary ID using the UUID package. So all we need to do is add an underscore ID property and set this equal to UUID, which we need to import right at the top of our file here. So actually we've already got v4 imported as UUID here. So if we scroll right down to the bottom again, we can set ID equal to UUID. So if we save this now then, and we scroll up to our chat page function, so right at the top of our chat page, we can destructure now the title and the messages from our props. So for now, let's just console log to see what we've got for each of those props then. Let's just console log our props here and log the title and messages. So if we save this now and take a look in the browser, if we open up our DevTools, let's give our page a refresh and make sure you're on a particular chat page. So make sure you're not on the new chat page. We need to be on an existing chat page. Then check our console logs and we can see our props here. We've got what is the oldest cat and the title is matching that. So that looks correct. Then we can see we have two messages in our array. The first one is the user message. And then the second one is what OpenAI responded back to us with. So now that we've got our messages available in our chat page component, in the next lecture, we're going to actually render those messages to the screen. In this lecture, we're going to render our messages for our chat page. So if we scroll down into our markup then, we can see we're already rendering our new chat messages. So ideally what we want to do is render any new chat messages after any chat messages that may already exist in an existing chat. So let's combine the new chat messages array with the messages prop. So at the top here, just before we're rendering our markup, let's go const all messages and set this equal to an array. And we just want to spread the messages that we're passing down as the props to this chat page component. And we want to spread the new chat messages. Then all we need to do is loop over all chat messages instead of new chat messages. So back down in our code then, instead of looping over new chat messages, let's loop over all chat messages. So if we save this now and take a look in the browser, there we go. Mine's already refreshed in the background and we can see I've got my messages associated with this particular chat already loaded. So let's click on through to different chats then, and we can see now our chat messages are all loading correctly. However, what happens then if we go to the new chat page, We can see we're getting an error here now, so messages is not iterable. So all we need to do is default messages then to an empty array if messages is null or undefined. And we can do that back in our code then. If we scroll up to the top of our components here, for our chat page props, let's default messages to an empty array. So if we save this now and take a look in the browser, there we go. We can click through to different existing chats, and we can successfully click through now to a new chat. However, what happens if I create a new chat? So let's say, what is the tallest tree? And hit send. Then once our stream has finished, we can see now we have this doubling up of messages. So we successfully navigated to the newly created chat page. However, we've got this doubling up of messages. So what happens if we click through to a different existing chat? We can see we've still got the new messages from the previous chat that was created, and we've got this incoming message all still rendering. So all we need to do is reset our new messages array and our incoming message whenever we navigate to a different chat page. So back in our code then, first of all, let's reset the incoming message. So if we scroll down to our handle submit, right after we finish streaming our response back, we can set our incoming message equal to an empty string here. So this will reset our incoming message. But whenever we navigate to a different route, we want our new messages, so our new chat messages, to reset. So let's add another useEffect hook at the top here. And within this useEffect hook, what we want to do is reset a bunch of state items anytime our chat ID changes. So essentially, anytime we click through to a different chat, we want to reset the values in our local state items. So we want to set our new chat messages to an empty array, and we want to set our new chat ID equal to null. So if we save this now then and take a look in the browser, if we go ahead and try to create another new chat, so I'm going to say, what is the deepest ocean, and hit send. We can see we get navigated to our newly created chat page, and we don't have this doubling up of chat messages. So quickly before we finish up this lecture then, what I want to do is refer to the completed project, and specifically I want to tidy up our sidebar here so our title for our chats do not span multiple lines. So we have this ellipsis here if the chat title doesn't fit on a single line. So back in our code then, if we head on over to our components, chat sidebar and chat sidebar.js, where we're rendering our chat list, let's wrap our chat title in a span tag. So let's add our chat title in a span tag here. Then let's add a bunch of class names to make sure that this span or the title doesn't span multiple lines. So we can add an overflow of hidden, a text, ellipsis, and a white space no wrap. Additionally, I think it's a good idea that we add a title attribute to this span tag and set it equal to chat.title. So let's demonstrate what this title will do then. Back in our code, we can already see that our styles have been applied, but now we can read the full title if we just hover over and wait a few seconds for that title to appear. So it's very, very small on the screen. We can see what is the deepest ocean. And if I move my mouse, it's actually going to make the title disappear. But it's this small black label underneath my cursor here. What is the deepest ocean? So this is appearing because we added that title attribute. And it's very handy to be able to read the full title if we have this ellipsis here. So in the next lecture then, what we're going to do is continue with our chat functionality, but specifically at the moment, we have no way to send a message to an already existing chat. So we'll take a look at doing this in the next lecture. In this lecture, we're going to implement our functionality where we're going to be able to post a new message to an already existing chat. So to be able to do this then, we need to modify our API and specifically our Pages API chat and send message API endpoint. So what we want to do is also be able to accept an optional data item to this endpoint, which will be the chat ID. So this send message endpoint will be able to do two different things. It will be able to post and create a new chat, or it will be able to add messages to an existing chat, which means then we'd need to pass a chat ID to this send message endpoint. So let's destructure chat ID from our request.json here, and we're getting an error here because we already have a chat ID set. If we scroll down here, we already have a chat ID set whenever we're creating a new chat. However, what we want to do is we want to check to see if a chat ID exists, because if a chat ID does exist, we don't want to create a new chat. We just want to add messages to that existing chat. So where we've got our fetch here for our create new chat, let's first wrap this in an if statement. So we want to check to see if chat ID exists. So it's within here then we want to add message to chat, else we'll create a new chat. So let's wrap our fetch then in the else block. So down to just before we open our stream reader here, let's wrap our create new chat in the else block. Then ideally what we want to do is, if we're creating a new chat, we want to set our chat ID equal to JSON._ID, but we want to set this as an endpoint level chat ID rather than scoped to the else block. So if we scroll up to the top of our function, let's use an alias for our chat ID and call it chat ID from param, because we can't override this chat ID from the param. So we're just setting an alias here to chat ID from param. Then we can set this chat ID from param to a let variable called chat ID. So it's a little bit of a funky workaround, but it will allow us to override the chat ID. So down here we can go let chat ID equal chat ID from param. Now we'll be able to override this chat ID, or I should say assign a new value to this chat ID. So that's exactly what we want to do then when we create a new chat. Instead of creating a const chat ID, we just want to set our endpoint level chat ID equal to JSON._ID. Then ideally what we want to do is, if we scroll down to where we're streaming our response, when we've got our on before stream here, we're emitting the chat ID as a new chat ID. However, we only want to do this if the chat ID has just been created by the send message endpoint. Because if we're just posting a message to an already existing chat, we don't want to emit this message. So if we scroll to the top then, let's create another let here called new chat ID, and we'll only set this new chat ID if we're actually creating a new chat. So where we're setting chat ID equal to JSON._ID, let's do exactly the same thing. Let's set new chat ID equal to JSON._ID. Then we can use this new chat ID within our on before stream. So we want to check to see if there is a new chat ID and only then emit the new chat ID if we created a new chat rather than adding a message to an existing chat. Because remember, the only reason we're using this new chat ID on the front end is to automatically navigate the user to that newly created chat page from the new chat page. So if we're already adding a message to an existing chat, we don't need to use that redirect or that navigation. So we only need the new chat ID if indeed we just created a new chat. So if we scroll back up to our if statement again then, let's add our logic to add a message to an already existing chat if we pass a chat ID to the send message endpoint. So here we can go const response and set this equal to await fetch, and we need to do exactly the same here. We need to grab the origin header from our request. So let's interpolate that then. Let's go req.headers.get origin. Then we want to hit the /API/chat/ and we want to hit the add message to chat endpoint. So remember, this is an endpoint that we've already created. So it's ideal that we can reuse this endpoint because that's exactly what we want to do. We want to add a message to an already existing chat. So let's hit the /chat/add message to chat endpoint. Then let's pass some configuration as the second argument to the fetch request. We want the method to be post. We want to pass headers as well. So we need to pass the content type, set that equal to application/JSON, and we need to set the cookie exactly like our other fetch requests from the send message endpoint. We need to set it equal to req.headers.get cookie. Then we need to pass the data that we want to save to our chat. So if we quickly remind ourselves the data that we can send to the add message to chat endpoint, we need to set a chat ID, a role, and content. So let's do exactly that then. Back in our send message API endpoint, let's pass a stringified JSON for the body property. So let's go JSON.stringify in here. So we said we needed the chat ID. So let's pass that down. We need the role. And again, this is a user sent message that we're sending or saving to our existing chat. So the role needs to be set to user, and the content we will set equal to the message that we post to the send message endpoint. So let's quickly remind ourselves what that parameter name is. So it's message. So if we scroll down, we just want to set content equal to message. So now that we've got our logic in place, all we need to do is pass the chat ID to the send message endpoint whenever we're on an existing chat page. So let's go to Pages, Chat, and Chat ID. Then if we scroll up to our handle submit function, and specifically to our fetch request to send message, we also want to pass the chat ID to the send message endpoint. So let's also pass chat ID in here. Then let's test this out in the browser now then. This all should work if we navigate to a particular chat and add a message to that chat. For the what do dogs eat, I'm just going to say what do cats eat and hit send. There we go. We can see our message was sent and we're streaming a response back, but our message disappeared. So we need to persist that message in the UI. However, we can quickly check to see if that message was persisted to our database. If we refresh that particular chat page, we can see that the message was persisted in our database, but we need it to persist in our UI. So back in our code then, within our Pages, Chat, and Chat ID page, let's create a new state item to store the full message that was received back from OpenAI. So right at the top here, let's create a const full message and set full message and set this equal to useState, passing in an empty string as the default state. Then within our handle submit function then, if we scroll down, let's set our full message equal to the full message that was streamed back from OpenAI. So to be able to do this then, we need to set up a let content up here. Let's set that equal to an empty string. Then we just need to add to content exactly the same way as what we've done when we're setting the incoming message. So in here then, let's go content and set that equal to content plus message.content. Then we can use this content variable, and underneath where we finished streaming our response back, let's use that then and set full message equal to the value of content. Then we can use this full message in a React hook at the top here in the use effect hook. Let's create another use effect hook here. So all we're doing is just separating out our logic for each use effect hook. And it's a good idea to comment these use effect hooks just so we know exactly what's going on. So for our first one, let's say when our route changes, we want to reset our state items. Then let's comment the third one here. Let's say if we've created a new chat, then we want to navigate to that new chat page. Then let's comment our new one here. We want to say save the newly streamed message to new chat messages. So let's do exactly that then. We want to check to see if generating response is false, and we want to check to see if there is a full message available. So if there is a full message available and generating response is false, then we want to save that message to our new chat messages. So here we can go set new chat messages, and we just want to update the previous state. So let's spread the previous messages in a new array here that we're going to return within the callback to the new chat messages function. Then we want to add a new message in here. So we need to add an underscore ID and set that equal to UUID. Remember, we're already importing UUID at the top. Then we need to set a role equal to assistant and the content equal to full message. Then we just want to reset the value of full message after we set our new chat messages. So let's go set full message and set that equal to an empty string. Then we need to pass our dependencies into our use effect hook. So let's pass the generating response and the full message as dependencies to our use effect. And I've just realized I've got generating response here. It should be generating response that I am referring to. So let's save this now then and take a look in the browser. Let's navigate to an existing chat and then let's add some new messages. So let's say, what is the deepest ocean, and hit send. So we'll stream our response back and we can see our response was now saved as part of the conversation. So while this is all well and good, currently in our send message API endpoint, OpenAI has no reference to our previous messages in our chat. So this is essentially just a new chat, a single question and a single response, and OpenAI doesn't know about previous messages in our chat. So in the next lecture, we're going to remedy this and implement previous messages and send them to OpenAI so it has some reference of our conversation. So we'll take a look at that in the next lecture. In this lecture, we're going to refactor our send message endpoint because at the moment, OpenAI doesn't remember the context of our conversation. So for example, I'm on a particular conversation here, and if I type a new message here asking ChatGPT to repeat my first message, so let's say something like, repeat my first question, and hit send, then the response that's streamed back is, I'm sorry, but I don't have access to the previous conversation history. So let's go ahead and fix this then and give OpenAI our conversation history whenever we ask it a question for a particular chat. So to do this, back in our code, for our pages, API, chat, and send message endpoint, what we want to do is, if we're already accessing an existing chat, so for example, if we've passed a chat ID to the send message endpoint, it means we're adding a message to an existing chat, which means we need to pass the conversation history to OpenAI. So we can grab this from our response when we're adding message to chat. Because if we quickly remind ourselves, in our add message to chat endpoint, if we scroll down to see the returned data, we can see we're returning the data for this particular chat. So this also includes the messages for this particular chat. So in our send message endpoint then, if we grab our messages from our response here, so first of all, we need to grab the JSON from our response. So let's go const JSON and set this equal to await response.json. Then we just want to grab our messages for this request. So at the top here, let's create a new let variable and let's call it something like chat messages and set this equal to an empty array. Then we want to set our chat messages here equal to our messages that come back from our add message to chat, i.e. the chat that we're already accessing. However, it's not as simple as this because the GPT 3.5 Turbo model has a maximum tokens of 4,096. Now, a token in the context of OpenAI is essentially roughly every 4 characters. So it's a bit more complicated than that. However, all we really need to know is a token is equal to about 4 characters, which means we have a maximum of 16,000 characters that OpenAI can process. Now, this character limit, the roughly 16,000 character limit, also includes our input or any data that we send to OpenAI. So if we sent 16,000 characters worth of data to OpenAI, so let's say our conversation history is already 16,000 characters, then OpenAI can't respond with anything because it has no character limit left. So we have that 16,000, or I should probably refer to it as the tokens. We have the 4,096 tokens available. So if we send 4,096 tokens to OpenAI, then OpenAI can't respond with anything. So to get around this, we can limit the number of messages that we send to OpenAI as part of our conversation history and limit it to 2,000 tokens, which would mean then if we send a maximum of 2,000 tokens as part of our conversation history to OpenAI, then it has around 2,000 tokens to be able to respond back to us with a message. So one caveat to this is obviously if we have a very long conversation, then OpenAI is going to forget the context of the start of that conversation. So it'll only remember the very latest messages, assuming they're within that 2,000 token limit. So unfortunately, there's no way around this for now, but we do need to implement this type of failsafe. So we only want to send a maximum of 2,000 tokens to OpenAI. Obviously, you can play around with this value yourself if you want to send a maximum of 3,000 tokens and only be able to receive a maximum of 1,000 tokens back from OpenAI, then that's absolutely fine. However, in this course, we're going to only send a maximum of 2,000 tokens as part of the conversation history to receive a maximum of 2,000 tokens back as part of the message response from OpenAI. So first of all, we need to set our chat messages equal to the response that came back from our add message to chat. So down here then, let's set chat messages equal to json.messages. And let's default this to an empty array just in case messages is null or undefined. Then we want to do exactly the same thing. So let's copy what we've got here. We want to do exactly the same thing when we're creating a new chat. So if we quickly refer to our pages, API, chat, and create new chat endpoint, we're returning the new chat messages whenever we create that new chat. So we want to do exactly the same thing. We want to set those new chat messages equal to chat messages whenever we're creating a new chat, and then we want to figure out and calculate our token usage. So down here then, let's create a const messages to include and set this equal to an empty array. Now we'll pass this messages to include to OpenAI. But before we do that, because our messages in MongoDB are sorted oldest to latest, we need to reverse that because we want to include starting from the very latest message and include as many latest messages as possible, going from latest to oldest as part of our conversation history. So to do that, we can go chat messages.reverse. Then we want to loop over each of these chat messages and then incrementally add a chat message if we're still under our token usage. So first of all, let's create a counter to count our used tokens so far. So let's create a let used tokens and set this equal to 0. Then let's loop over each of our chat messages. So let's go for let chat message of chat messages. Then let's calculate the number of message tokens that this particular chat message in our loop consists of. So let's go const message tokens and set this equal to chat message.content.length. So remember, we're saving our chat message to a property called content. Remember, we've got the role and the content belonging to a particular chat message. So obviously it's this content property we want to access. So chat message.content.length divided by 4. So this will give us roughly the amount of tokens that the content for this message consists of. Then we want to increment our used tokens by the number of this current message tokens. So let's go used tokens equals used tokens plus message tokens. Then we want to check to see if this message can be added as part of our messages to include. So we can go if used tokens is less than or equal to 2000, because remember we said we can pass a maximum of 2000 tokens as part of the conversation history. Then we can add this message to the messages to include. So let's go messages to include dot push chat message. So then if we end up going over this 2000 token limit, let's add an else statement here and let's just break out of the loop. Then we just need to call our OpenAI Edge stream with these messages to include, but we need to reverse again our messages to include because OpenAI expects our messages to go from oldest to latest. So currently they're latest to oldest, but we need to reverse again to make sure the order is oldest to latest. So let's go messages to include dot reverse. Then if we scroll down to our OpenAI request, instead of passing this single object to our messages array, let's remove this single object and we want to pass the messages to include. So because the messages to include is an array, we want to spread this. So let's go dot 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 messages to include. So before we take a look at this in the browser then, this is a quick lecture update because I've realized after I created this lecture, I had a small mistake. So if we scroll up to where we are setting our chat messages, and specifically in our else block for our create new chat, we don't want to set chat messages equal to json.chat.messages. We want to set chat messages equal to json.messages. So if we remove the .chat.messages there, so it's just json.messages. And the reason for this is because if we take a look at our create new chat endpoint, what we're returning is just the chat. So just the data for the chat, whereas compared to add message to chat, we are returning a chat property with the data for that chat on that chat property. So it may also be a good idea if you wanted to make this consistent. So either remove this chat property or add a chat property for our create new chat. However, I'm going to keep it like this for now. I'm not going to do any refactoring. All I'm going to do is point out that in our send message endpoint, when we're using the create new chat endpoint, we need to reference json.messages. However, in our add messages to chat endpoint, we need to reference json.chat.messages. So with that said then, let's save this now then and take a look in the browser. This all should work if we refresh a particular chat page. And again, I'm going to ask what was my first question and then hit send. And there we go. We have a response of your first question was, what is the tallest tree? So if we scroll to the top, we can see that that indeed was my first question. So now we have conversation history as part of our chats in our application. In this lecture, we're going to deploy our app live to a production environment hosted on Vercel. So first of all, we need to create a GitHub repository to host our code. So first of all, head on over to github.com and we'll need to create a new repository. So we need to hit this new repository here, this new repository button from within our GitHub dashboard. And I've actually already created a repository for this course. However, I'm going to go through again just to show you how to upload your code to a GitHub repository. So for our new GitHub repository, we need to give it a name. I've called mine Chatty Pete Course. And of course, I can't create another project called Chatty Pete Course. So I'm just going to add -2 on the end here. Then it's up to you whether you want to keep this repository public or private. If you keep it public, then obviously anyone will be able to view your repository. However, if you don't want anyone to see your repository or anyone to see your code, then just select private. I'm going to select public for mine though. Then all we need to do is hit create repository. And one important thing to note is we can easily update the visibility of our repository within the settings tab. And if we scroll all the way down to the danger zone, we can change our visibility here. So if we click on change visibility, because mine is public, I can change it to private. However, I'm going to keep it as public. Then what we want to do is if we navigate to the main page of our repository, GitHub is informing us that this is a brand new repository, so we need to add some code to this repository. And because we created our project using create next app and with the boilerplate starter repo that I created for this course, then Git is actually already set up as part of our project. So all we need to do is follow the instructions for this second section here. We just need to copy and paste every single line. So these 3 lines here, so each at a time. So let's copy this first line here, which will point our repository to this new URL. So if we copy that line and head on back to our code, within our terminal then, we just need to paste each line of code and hit enter. However, I'm not going to do that because I've already set this up, but just copy and paste each line of code and back in the terminal then, just paste and run each one of those lines of code. Then head on over to the source control tab and you'll need to type some sort of commit message. And for every single one of my projects, when I first commit to a Git repository, I give the message something like initial commit, and then you need to hit commit and then hit the sync button, which will then push your code up to your new repository. And of course, I'm not doing any of these actions because I've already set mine up on this particular repository here. So Chatty Pete Course is my repository, and I've already gone ahead through all of those steps and uploaded my code to this Chatty Pete Course repo. So with that said then, once we have a GitHub repository all set up, I'm going to navigate to my Chatty Pete Course repository. We should be able to see all of our code has been uploaded to this repo. From here then, all we need to do is set up our Vercel project. So let's head on over to Vercel, and I've already logged into my account here. So if you don't have an account, then sign up. And once you're on your Vercel dashboard, we need to create a new project. We can see I've already got multiple projects here. However, what we need to do is hit add new project. Then we need to import a repository from Git. And it's at this point, you're probably going to need to sign in to your Git account or your GitHub account. And you should be prompted in this window here where I can see my list of repositories. You should be prompted to connect your GitHub account to Vercel. So once you've done that, then you need to select your repository from the list. Now mine is Chatty Pete Course, so I'm going to import Chatty Pete Course. Then we need to add our environment variables for this project. So if we head on back to our code again then, for our .env.local file, let's just copy all of the content for our .env.local file and head on back to Vercel. Then we need to open up this environment variables tab. And for this first environment variable name, if we just paste all the content from our .env.local file, then Vercel will add each of those environment variables individually. So let's paste all the content there, and we can see that Vercel has picked up that this is a .env file and added the key value pairs where appropriate. So all we need to do now is hit deploy. However, while our site will build successfully, it's not actually going to work because we need to do some slight configuration for Auth0. Because at the moment, if we quickly take a look in our .env.local file, we're saying our Auth0 base URL is localhost 3000. However, we need to point now to an actual production domain name. So we're going to get this production domain name now. Vercel is going to assign us a generated subdomain name, which we can use for our auth0 base URL. So we need to wait for our project to finish building and finish deploying. However, once our project has finished building and deploying, we need to click on this button here, the continue to dashboard. Then we want to find the domain name that Vercel assigned us. So we can find it here under domains. It's chatgptcourse.vercel.app. So that's my domain name. Yours will probably be different. However, we need to copy this domain name and head on over to our auth0 dashboard. Again, I'm already logged in, but we want to navigate to our applications and our ChatGPT course application. Then we need to scroll down within the settings tab. We need to scroll down and find our allowed callback URLs and add our production domain name in here now. So let's paste our production domain name in here. We need to prefix it with HTTPS, and we need to add /API/auth/callback. And we want to do exactly the same thing for our allowed logout URLs. We want to add our ChatGPT course.vercel.app, but we need to prefix it with HTTPS. So once we've updated our auth0 settings then for our project, let's scroll down right to the bottom and hit Save Changes. Then there's one last thing I want to do, and that is back in our Vercel dashboard, we need to go over to our Settings tab. Then we need to go to our environment variables. And if we scroll down, we need to update our auth0 base URL because at the moment it's still pointing to localhost 3000. So we need to update this then. So let's hit Edit. And we need to update it to, if we scroll to the top here, where we've added our allowed logout URLs, we need to just copy our live production URL or our live production domain, and we need to update it for our auth0 base URL. So our auth0 base URL on our production environment is going to be the domain name that Vercel gave us for our live app. So if we hit save on this now then, and one last thing we need to do in our settings tab is if we go to our functions tab, this is where our serverless functions are running. Ideally, we want our serverless functions, because our serverless functions are interacting with our database more often than not. Ideally, we want our function region to be in the same region as our MongoDB Atlas database. So remember right at the start of the course, when we set up our MongoDB Atlas database, we could select a region for our database to be hosted in. So I chose Jakarta for that region. So I'm going to update my functions here from North America to the closest place to Jakarta, which by the looks in this list is Singapore. So it's always a good idea to make sure that your serverless functions region within Vercel is in the same or a similar region to your MongoDB Atlas database. So once we've updated our region then, let's hit save. Then we can head on over to deployments, and we want to select our very first deployment here. We want to select the more options icon and hit redeploy, and again hit redeploy. So this will rebuild our app now with the updated environment variables and our updated function region. So once our project has finished redeploying, let's click on through to our domain name for our project to make sure everything is working on our production environment. And it's already logged me in because I'm already logged into my project. However, let's test this in, let's log out, let's hit login again, and let's make sure everything is working. So let's log into the app with our existing account. And there we go, seems everything is working. So let's hit new chat, and let's make sure our new chat functionality is working. And let's say something like, teach me how to sail, and hit send. And there we go, we get a pretty funny response back, all streaming back appropriately, and everything seems to be working as expected.